is Emily Dean, and I have been volunteered by some of the other members of the commission to start this welcome tonight. Just briefly before we get started, I just want to recognize Commissioner Sean Logan is in the second row right here, raising his hand. We also have our city manager, Tim Burton, and then City Commissioner Andy Shirtliff is right next to Tim. We want to just take a second to thank all of you for being here. I know that this is a beautiful night that you could be doing other things. We really appreciate your service to the community. All of the volunteer hours that go into our citizen advisory boards make a huge impact on the way that not just the commission looks at policies and priorities, but city staff as well. I think it gives us a really good outlet to collect more information from constituencies that we may not always hear from. I would also just note too, I think that the way that we run our advisory committees and boards is a constant work in progress. You're going to meet Ashley from the local government center. And local government center has been really super helpful to us in getting us to a place where we have super effective boards and committees that run efficiently, that are consistent with open meeting law and what is expected under the state constitution and state statute. And this has been a huge priority for the commission, I would say, going back the last 2.5 years to get to a place where our boards can provide timely and actionable recommendations to the commission so that your time is well spent and that we can actually make policy changes based on your input. So just want to say thank you. Welcome you to this event tonight. We have Ashley Kent from the Local Government Center, our city attorney, Rebecca Doctor. Right here, this is Alex Montiel. She is our deputy clerk. And in the very back is Danae Claiborne, who was our commission clerk. So none of these things happen without these wonderful individuals that really keep us on track and also help us keep the city on track. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and just want to thank you again for your time tonight and your dedication to the City of Helena.
Thanks, ma'am. Thank you. So can you hear me? Are you good? Yeah, okay. When we first started talking about doing this training tonight, we debated about which order we should go in. And these lovely ladies kindly reminded me that Dan and I, if you've had a training from either of us, we tend to speak in paragraphs. So I'm going to do my very best to stay on time and leave plenty of time. My name is Ashley Kent. I am the Associate Director of the Local Government Center, which is a part of MSU Extension. We've been around for about 35 years and do this kind of work around the state. We provide training, technical assistance, and research to local governments across Montana. The bulk of what we do really is working with the people who volunteer in their community to serve their neighbors, their friends, their family, make sure that you can be successful in what you do. So that's what I do. That's who I am. Happy to take questions as we go. I'd love to have them in context instead of holding them for the end. So this should be very participatory. I get very excited when we're going to talk about governance. People think I'm weird about that, but it really is a really cool system. Does everybody have a packet that looks something like this? If you don't, let me know. We got a whole bunch of them back here. We'll get them spread out. Ma'am. Okay, so if you don't have one, you're welcome to come grab one. This is the training document that we use around the state. This has a lot of the state statute that defines how you do what you do, and we'll go through some of that. But before we do, I'd love to spend just a moment doing a bit of a thought exercise to talk about why we have local government at all. Why does local government exist? Is it because you guys don't have anything better to do on a Wednesday night? What do you think? What's the purpose? Yeah, sure, just shout it out. Yeah. Absolutely. So responding to local needs, because I would be willing to bet that the things that are needed by the community in Helena might be slightly different than those in Havre or in Hingham or in Ekalaka. Folks in Ekalaka say hi, by the way, saw them last week. So local government allows you to be responsive to local needs. The types of things that local government does provides order, law and order, law enforcement, structure, roads, water, sewer, all kinds of services. Now, what would happen if you were responsible for paving the road in front of the property you live in and up to 50 feet on either side? We're not going to give you the equipment, the materials, the skilled labor. Figure it out, but you got to do it. What would it be like to drive from here to Missoula? I mean, it's already a little rough. It would be intense, right? So that's an example of a thing that we can't do as individuals. We have to come together as a community to make it happen, right? So we come together, we say, we need to do this thing to serve the greater good of our community. How do you pay for that thing? Taxes, right? And whose taxes? Yours, right? The community's taxes. So it's a community service, let's say roads and streets, community taxes to pay for it. So we pool our resources. And then who oversees the administration of that service, the spending of that money? Local government. And if you didn't know, that's all y'all. You guys are the government now. I don't know if anybody told you. Okay, so local services, local money, local people. That's what makes it different than something like expansionist England, where you had a government conquer a faraway land and appoint a representative from London to go govern there because you guys don't know what you're doing. Let us do it for you. How well would that work in Montana? We're kind of a rowdy bunch, right? Local government is unique. It's the government that's closest to the people, and I would argue the one that impacts your daily life the most. And if you don't believe me, did you get up this morning and take a shower with clean water? Did you drive down roads that were drivable and everybody obeyed the traffic laws? You walked in, you walked into the building and you knew you were safe. Those are all local government functions. You know you can run down the street to any of the restaurants and eat and not have nasty things in your food and water because we have standards, right? And they're enforced by local government. That's what local government does. How do we, well, we've got all kinds of structures, all kinds of frameworks to help us understand local government. Start at the very top. What are some of your constitutional rights? I can't hear anything up here, so you're going to have to shout at me. Freedom of speech and assembly, yes. What else? Freedom of religion, tied in there, yes. What else? Freedom of the press. Right to organize. Ooh, look at you guys go. That's great. Where can you find those rights? What document holds them? The Bill of Rights, okay? Which one? This is where it gets tricky. The Constitution, which one? Yes. So it turns out, if you want to be part of the cool kids club that is the US Union, you have to have a state constitution to get admitted, which means you have to have a supreme governing document of the land, geographically bound, in this case, Montana, in order to get into another group that has another supreme governing document of the land, right? We have the US Supreme Court and we have the Montana Supreme Court. We hear about those, and unless you're somebody like City Attorney Doctor here, sometimes we don't really know what the difference is. How do we know what goes to the state Supreme Court? How's that decided? State law. So it depends on which constitution you're talking about. So when we see, like I'm sure you all saw in the media this last year, the case about the right to a clean and healthy environment, that was heard before the Montana Supreme Court, right? Because that is a constitutional right in the Montana Constitution. So the good folks in Idaho, they don't necessarily have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, but we do in Montana. So in 1889, that's when we became part of the Union. That was our second attempt at a constitution. And it heavily favored one industry. Which one do you think it was? Did you say Congress? Oh, copper, yes, Butte, right? So the power was held in Butte and Anaconda with the mining magnates, and they made sure the Constitution that was adopted at that time didn't hurt them. In fact, it was not necessarily against the Constitution that we had originally adopted for the decisions to, by and large, be made in the back rooms in Butte, and then everybody went to Helena and was told how they were going to vote. And we ran like that for about 80 years. How's that sit with the other 95% of the state? Not great. Not great. That's one of the reasons that we had the Constitutional Convention in 1970 here in Helena. We had 100 delegates from across the state come together because we collectively, as a public, said, you know, what we have as a governing document just isn't working for us. So let's try again. We're going to Control-Alt-Delete. 100 people come to Helena. We'll get you together in a room. We'll debate this out. We'll try again. Deal was, if you were a Constitutional Convention delegate, you could never hold state office. So you can't write the Constitution to benefit you in the long run. It's for the benefit of the people of the state. So knowing we had the whole kind of shady thing going on up to that point about how decisions were made, the Constitutional Convention delegates very much had at the forefront of their mind the expectation and desire to memorialize the rights of the people of the state with the people of the state. Not with a company, not with a government structure, but with the people themselves. In fact, it says we do not abdicate our right to participation just because we're being represented in a democracy. So you get things like, in our Constitution, the right to public participation prior to final action. That is a constitutional right. It's not just a law, it's a constitutional right. The right to know and observe documents and public procedures. Those are all things that are really heavily weighted in our state. And up to this point in your life, you have been able to exercise your constitutional rights pretty much whenever you want, whenever it's convenient for you, right? But now that you're on the other side of the table, now that you are the government, you're now responsible for protecting everybody else's constitutional rights every single time you meet, right? Define public for me. So City of Helena, let's say you're on one of the advisory boards. Who is the public for you? Who do you have to protect rights for? You are the public. Okay, so the people on the board, yes. What about the people that live in city limits? Yes. What about the people that live outside of city limits? Yes. What about the people that live outside the county? I'm from Elliston, so I'm not in Lewis and Clark County. Do I have the same rights as somebody that lives in town to participate in your board meetings? Yes. What about somebody from West Virginia? Yes. So our state Supreme Court has said, it says public. It doesn't say citizens. You are responsible for protecting the rights for everybody. Every time you do something, make a decision as a local government. Now, does that include the commission? Yeah. What about the boards that are not final decision makers? Yeah, we'll talk all about that. So this is a really high bar. You have a lot riding on what you do. You stepped into really big shoes. And thank you for what you do, because the local government system only works because people like you show up and give your time. Okay. How many of you have seen the Montana Constitution? Woohoo! How big is it? This here is the state constitution, the federal constitution, and all of the amendments. Does everybody else have a pocket constitution they just carry around? No, just me. Okay. How accurate and how precise can this document be? It can't, right? It's big picture. It's long-term vision policy. These are the broad strokes. This is what we want to be in the future in our next generation's kind of policies. So that's the top level of documents in Montana, the state constitution. And then how do we get from that to state law? Has anybody been to the frenzy that happens at the Capitol every other year? Oh, it's intense in there. Legislature meets for 90 days every other year. And they translate, in theory, by the bills brought, they translate those ideas, those interests for the people of the state into laws as long as they are not inconsistent with the Constitution, right? So you have the legislature, and the bills that pass are then codified and become part of the Montana Code annotated. Now, have you seen the Montana Code annotated printed out? Oh, how big is it? Ooh, it's like, you remember like back in the day before we had Google, the old Encyclopedia Britannicas? Looks kind of like that, only fancier because it's a law book, right? It's a big set of documents. Are they always exactly accurate and clear? Nope. Are there things that you can do in the city of Helena that you can't do in the city of Great Falls, or vice versa? How is that possible? Local laws. So under the state law, the local governing bodies, the city commission or the city commission or the county commission, have the authority to establish local laws. It could look like a policy via ordinance or resolution. Nope, ordinance, etc. Okay? So you have constitution, you have state law, you have local law. What else governs how you do what you do? Charter. Tell me more about what do you mean by charter? Yes. So the reason I ask, and that's a great response, charter has a legal definition in Montana. So we have charter that we think of in like the nonprofit world that's kind of your organizing purpose document. Charter in Montana is somewhat of a local constitution. It's your written form and plan of government. And Helena has adopted that. They adopted it, is it in the 70s? Is that, yeah. Oh, it's like you guys work here and know these things. So you've had one for a long time, which means you also have self-governing powers. We're not going to get into that in depth, but you do have some authority to set your structure in a way that Deer Lodge in Powell County doesn't, because they operate under general governing. So there's the city charter that governs you locally. And then inside of that, you have likely a resolution of creation of some flavor that created your board and defined its purpose. And then the city also has adopted some relatively uniform bylaws or rules of procedure. And finally, the very bottom is parliamentary procedure, some kind of parliamentary system. So this is what we call constitution to action. How do we get from this big picture document to how do we make a motion in a meeting and everything in between? Now, what happens? Who's a referee if we have a question and we can't come to an agreement? Who does that go to? The court system. So it's the judicial branch, right? That third branch of government. And that could be up to the Montana Supreme Court, or it could be the Attorney General. So you could ask for an Attorney General opinion to get clarification on the law without having to take something through the court system, right? Both of them count as the judicial branch in this case. Questions on this? Make sense? Okay. As much as it may not feel like it, government truly is all about people. Specifically, how we categorize and interact with the different groups that we form. What are the three branches of government? Legislative, executive, and judicial. Okay. You didn't know this was going to be a civics lesson. Here we are. At the state level, who's the legislative branch? So the legislature, right, at the state level. And who's the executive? The governor, okay. And at the city level, who's the legislative? Commissioners. And who's the executive? So the mayor in Helena, because of your charter, that unique form of government that you've adopted, actually serves as part of the legislative branch. True? Yes? Okay. I want to make sure I'm mixing up towns. So if the mayor is part of the legislative branch, then who's running the executive branch? That dude. Your city manager. Mr. Burton in Helena is your city manager because you operate under the commission manager structure of government. Okay, so city manager oversees the executive branch, and the commission and the mayor make up the legislative branch. Now, what does the legislative branch do? In general, what's their big job? Create policy. Okay, so they're the ones creating policy, and then the executive branch executes the policy. right? So it's a balance. There's some overlap, and it's well defined. We're not going to spend a bunch of time on that. But what I want you to think about is, where do the boards sit in this structure? Yeah, sub-legislative. Why? Yeah. So first and foremost, you were created by the commission, by an action of the legislative body, right? So creation of means that you are a part of this circle. And really important piece to that, your purpose is to help inform and advise that legislative policy-making body. And I struggle. There's generally two types of boards. There's administrative and advisory. Administrative tend to have some delegated authority to take action without governing body commission approval. And administrative, their only power, their only function is to advise the commission. That's the only thing they can do. And I hate to say it like that because it sounds like it diminishes their role. It is absolutely critical that those advisory boards are functioning, they're engaging with the public, they're inviting them into conversations, and bringing good, well thought out ideas and suggestions to that governing body. Because there's only a handful of them, they just don't have the time in the day to have the in-depth discussions with the members of the community to come up with really good, nuanced, complex solutions, right? Not in the same way that a board dedicated to that topic could. So while it says only advisory, that role is critically important to the successful functioning of the legislative branch. So the boards are there to inform the commission, and there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship there. But who has final say? The commission, right? That's why they're elected into those seats. Once the decision is made, then executive branch takes over and executes those things. So who falls under the executive branch? What group of people? The staff, okay. And this is a really important distinction because if you were created by the legislative body and Mr. Burton oversees the staff and the executive branch, these two circles, at least those functions, shouldn't overlap. So unless the delegated authority has been specifically given to a board to provide instruction or direction to a staff member, you don't have the authority to do that, especially as an individual. Because how much power do you have as an individual board member outside of a meeting? None. None at all. You are no different than the everyday citizen. You can walk into the city clerk's office, do a records request just like anybody can, but you are not more important or more prioritized than the everyday citizen. Or at least you shouldn't be, right? You are one of 5 votes, and that's the way that you enact your representative power is through your vote, not through directing staff. So I always make that distinction when we do board trainings because I think it's easier to see it this way, that especially if, I don't know if we have assigned liaisons in Helena, but that can get really, really confusing. I was working with Butte Silverbow, and it can get really confusing about who reports to who. And the reason I tell you that is because if you are acting outside of course and scope, you are personally liable. The City of Helena cannot represent you in a lawsuit if you are acting outside of your course and scope. Which means if the resolution that created you says the board members can do this, and you do this. For example, we have time for the tree board story? Okay, so how many of you have been to Eastern Montana? Okay, how many trees are in Eastern Montana in your experience? Not a lot, okay. So there's a community in Eastern Montana that has, luckily, a tree board, which is an advisory board to the city council. And the advisory board was doing some rounds. They just all kind of walked around town, checked out what the trees look like. And they found one tree that was hanging over the property line into the city right-of-way, the sidewalk. And the structure of the branches were starting to degrade. So it was becoming a hazard for people walking underneath it. So this is what city government looks like, right? The tree board told the council said, hey, mayor, fix it. Mayor went to the public works director, fix it. Public works director told the dude on the ground, hey, go fix this. He goes out, fix the issue, gets there. The tree's not technically on public property. They can't do anything about it yet. There's no imminent danger. So he goes back to the public works director, who goes back to the mayor, who goes back to the commission, who goes back to the tree board and says, thanks for your input, but we can't do anything about it. And I don't know why we are always concerned that public process is so slow. No. Why do we put up with that? Why is it that we deal with that glacial speed of decision making? What's that? Democracy, because you have to uphold the constitutional rights, including the right to participate. You need to be fair to everybody in town, not the ones that speak the loudest, right? And if we have to pick between expediency and upholding democratic rights, the rights win every single time. Local government is not meant to be speedy. It's meant to be fair, because it's a different relationship than you have with other vendors in your life. Such as, let's say you went to Albertsons and had a bad experience. Do you have other options about places where you can get your groceries and home goods? Yeah? What if you had an unpleasant interaction with the road crew as they were sanding the road? Do you get to pick a new road crew? No. So it's much more of a relational kind of interaction than transactional with local government. You are dependent on them for that sole provider for that service, and they are dependent on you to continue to support that service. Much different. How many times has Target come to you personally and said, hey, here's our annual budget. Will you take a look at it? Tell me what you think. It's different. It's fundamentally different. And this is coming from somebody who has a couple of business degrees, and I'm sure that the world could run better with business. If you do that in local government, like I said, I'm from Powell County. It's nice, but it's not that nice. Okay? For those of you who don't understand that, the state prison is in Deer Lodge. You cannot run government like you run a business. It's fundamentally a different system. Okay. All right. So if you get outside, back to the tree board. Okay. So is the tree board happy with the conversation that came back? No. Why are we spending all of our Thursday nights doing these meetings if you're just going to tell us you can't do anything about it anyway? This is a waste of our time. So one of the disgruntled tree board members, he takes his chainsaw for a walk on a Saturday afternoon, and suddenly the branch is gone. Okay. And the homeowner comes back, and is she happy about the new trimmings to her tree? Not at all. So she sues the city, and turns out that because that board member was acting outside of course and scope, he didn't have the authority to take action beyond advising. He had to defend himself in that lawsuit. The city couldn't defend on his behalf because it wasn't what they delegated his authority to be. Does that make sense? Okay, so make sure you know what your role is. And this, I don't tell you, well, I tell you all these stories because they're big, scary stories, because I want you to know like kind of the worst case scenario. Most of the time, there's very easy ways to not put yourselves in these positions. If you screw up bad enough on that side of the table, on the local government side, a couple of things could happen. You could cost yourself or your community a ton of money. You could potentially go to jail and have a fine. And if it's really, really bad, we will definitely use you as the example around the state when we train. So weigh the risks as they mean something to you. Okay, let's talk about your packets. I think we're ready. So if you open your packet to page 1, at the top there should be a purple triangle. And at the top of that page, as you can see at the local government center, we like to highlight things that we think are important, so the entire packet is highlighted. That's what we do. We are terrible in this digital age in trying to conserve paper. But what I want you to focus on right now are these top 3 statements that are highlighted on page 1. These are out of the Montana Constitution, not the federal Constitution. Montana Constitution says that the public, 1, has the right to expect governmental agencies to afford such reasonable opportunity for citizen participation in the operations of the agency prior to final decision as may be provided by law. That's a whole lot of legalese that says you must allow the public to comment prior to taking action for every action that's of significant public interest. You must allow public comment, okay? Number 9, no person shall be deprived of the right to examine documents. Every document that is a record of a local government, which is pretty much all of them, be careful when you are in a board meeting or a committee meeting and you're writing on your agenda and writing notes to each other. Those are going to be public documents. Do not get on your phone or your laptop during a meeting, because if you're texting back and forth or if you're emailing, those are also public documents and you need to turn them in. Okay. So no person shall be deprived of the right to examine documents. or to observe the deliberations of all public bodies or agencies of state government and its subdivisions. So they have to be allowed to see the documents and observe the conversation before you make a decision. You don't get to just walk in because you're hanging out in the back room with medals and Butte and say, hey, we know what we're going to do. There you go. They need to see that conversation, okay? Except in the cases where individual privacy, the demand for individual privacy clearly exceeds the merits of public disclosure. Because in Montana, we believe number 10, the right to an individual's privacy is essential to the well-being of a free society and shall not be infringed without the showing of a compelling state interest. What that translates to for all of you is if you are ever in a position where you have to close a meeting to talk about personal private information, you are holding two equally weighted constitutional rights. And to uphold one, you're necessarily going to have to violate the other. And that could come with a big expense. So make sure you're doing it right. Most of you shouldn't be in a position where you have to close a meeting because pretty much everything you talk about is open to the public. But if you get in that position, you really need to talk to competent legal counsel before you go into that meeting. It's a big deal. Okay, so those are the three rights that we focus on at the center when we talk about local government operations. Those are the ones that are most relevant to the work that you do here. Now, if you look down at 23103, that next big highlighted chunk, for me, this is the most important statute in the entire code in terms, well, related to local government and open meetings. It's the bridge between those three constitutional rights and how do we actually do that? If you understand the intent between 23103, everything else is just the details about how you do it. Okay? So the first section there says, each agency shall develop procedures for permitting and encouraging the public to participate in agency decisions that are of significant interest to the public. What that translates to is you must have bylaws, which City of Helena has done a wonderful job of making sure that those are set up and consistent with state law and constitutional intent. You must have bylaws, and those bylaws must include procedures that not only permit, but encourage the public to participate prior to final action. You must be encouraging them to participate. So it's not enough to just say, hey, we're going to meet at this place, but come and share your thoughts. We want to know what you have to say before we make a decision. You have to do that by law, okay? The next sentence says, the procedure must ensure adequate notice and assist public participation before a final agency action is taken that is of significant interest to the public. So remember when we talked about the statutes aren't always super clear? This is a great example of that. What is adequate notice? 48 hours, it depends. Oh, I like these attorney answers. Are you catching this? Okay, where'd you come up with 48 hours? Like, I don't know, there was follow-up questions, dang it. It depends. So it's nowhere in statute. You won't find a law that says 48 hours or more. And this is a great example of we need to clarify, so we're going to go and ask that third branch of government to give us some more details. There was an attorney general opinion. It was when Missouri was the attorney general, and they asked him to define what is adequate notice. Because some folks said 12 hours in a tweet, we're good, right? And some said, I want it snail mailed, the whole packet, to my house 2 weeks ahead of time. We've got to find something in the middle here. So he went through, did his analysis, and came back and said 48 hours is the minimum to meet that expectation of adequate notice. And that amount of time should increase with the importance of the decision being considered. So if the City of Helena decided they wanted to just no longer be a city, you're going to need more than 48 hours notice, right? That's not going to happen. And usually when you're making big decisions, you're going to talk about it at more than one meeting. You don't just bring it up at 6 o'clock and at 6:07 you've spent $3 million, right? That's not how it works. So typically it's iterative over several meetings. Now it also says you have to assist and do all that stuff when the topic is of significant public interest. What's significant public interest? It depends. God, we love these answers. It depends. Who gets to decide? The public. It's their right. And it's funny how things become very significant after the decision doesn't go the way they wanted it to. So they get to decide what is significant public interest. So in that same Attorney General's opinion, he said significant public interest, because they said, we need a definition of this. And he said, no worries, I got you. Said significant public interest is anything more than a ministerial act. That was super helpful. Thank you. Ministerial act. What that means is something that's administrative in nature that doesn't require any legislative discretion in the decision. For example, let's say the commission usually meets the first and third Wednesdays of the month at 5:30. But next month, the first Wednesday is a holiday. So a quorum of the commission could be huddled out in the hallway to say, hey, next month it's a holiday on Wednesday, let's move it to Thursday. They could have that conversation with a quorum outside of public view and not be violating open meeting laws because it's administrative in nature. Anything more than that could and likely will rise to the level of significant public interest if pressed. So err on the side of transparency and put every decision on the agenda. Don't have those discussions behind closed doors. Your goal is to be as consistent and transparent as possible to the point of boredom. Because what's the most expensive currency that you deal in? The public's trust. It's really, really hard to gain trust, especially as a local government. You're already kind of at a disadvantage, and it's really easy to lose it. So public trust should weigh into your decisions about should we or should we not notice this, that kind of thing. Yes, state law is important. Yes, the Constitution is important. And public trust is one of the real things that you are dealing in, right? So even if it's technically legal, 48 hours, you could post an agenda for a Monday 8 a.m. commission meeting on Friday at 6 p.m. because it doesn't say business hours, it just says 48 hours, and you'd be meeting the letter of the law. How trustworthy does that look? Not at all, right? So even though it's meeting that 48-hour minimum, it still may not be enough. Okay, let's keep moving. As of 2023 legislative session, that green block in the middle, you are now required to post all agendas online, either in the newspaper of general circulation of the area, the IR, if they will allow you to do it free of charge, or if that's not the case, on the agency's primary website or social media site. Luckily, in an organization your size, you have a sophisticated clerk of commission office and support staff that are making sure that all of these things are happening, so you don't have individual boards out there sporadically adding things to websites that nobody knows exist. So if you don't know what the process is, make sure you talk to the professional staff in the city and know how that is routed. But now it just has to be online. Okay. The agenda must include an item, subsection C, that allows public comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting, but is under the jurisdiction of the body that is meeting. So what that means is if you are having a work session on the budget, and for some reason you're not going to allow public comment because there's no final action taken, don't know why you would, but you could, you still have to have an item on the agenda for public comment for items not on the agenda. That has to be on every single public meeting agenda. Now, is a work session a meeting? Yes. Is a committee meeting an open meeting? Yes. Everything, there's some elements we'll talk about here in a minute. If it meets the two elements that are the requirements for a meeting that define a meeting, it is a meeting. I don't care what you call it, it's a meeting. Okay? Let's talk about agendas real quick. The public comment thing. So I like to see, after you do the opening ceremonies, the roll call, the called meeting to order, roll call, pledge, introduce guests, that kind of thing, before you do anything else, I like to see an opportunity for public comment, at least for items on the agenda. You can do on the agenda and items not on the agenda at the same time if you want, but some opportunity for the public to comment before you make any decisions, including approving the previous meeting minutes. Because, remember I told you that if you screw up bad enough, we're going to tell on you? There was a metro community, we don't like to name names, but it was Great Falls, that screwed up really bad. They had in the city of Great Falls, their animal control officer is a contracted service. It's not a department, not an employee. So they had a contracted service provider providing at-large animal control, and they were going to switch to a new provider, and this was a massive debate in Great Falls, right, over months. Finally got it all calmed down, made a decision. They were going to switch providers. And then they realized that they missed the start date, like 6-week gap between the old provider and the new provider. And they didn't really want at-large dogs running around Great Falls for 6 weeks. So they moved the start date, up or extended the old one, whichever way it went, by 6 weeks and put it in their consent agenda, which in and of itself is not necessarily bad. But a gal from Vaughan, so they did their opening ceremonies, consent agenda, approved the meeting minutes, all that kind of stuff, then got to public comment for items on the agenda before they got to the action items, before they got to old business and new business. She got up and just was beside herself. How dare you? You people are awful. What are you thinking? Well, this is such a terrible decision. You need to reconsider what could possibly going on. They said, ma'am, thank you for your public comment. Your 3 minutes are up. She kept going, kept getting more animated. Ma'am, we really need you to wrap it up. We got to get to the next person. Would not stop. So they finally had the plain clothes on duty detective come in and escort her out of the room, which, by the way, is the nuclear option. Don't do that. Unless you have imminent threat to safety, recess a meeting to stop somebody. Don't just jump to kicking them out with the cops, because you will not win that battle in the court of public opinion. So they have the detective come in, gathers up her stuff at the podium, her papers, and he takes her by the elbow and kind of escorts her out of the room. They get to the back of the room, and she knees him in the groin and takes off running. And now he's laying on the floor, rolling around. She's sprinting through City Hall, all over a 3-minute public comment period. Got spicy in Great Falls. There is a YouTube channel called Bad Board Behavior. My goal is to have 0% representation from Montana. So if you can work with me on that, we want to stay off of that YouTube channel. Okay, so back to Great Falls. Also, my lovely mother is here because I've been doing this for 10 years and she still doesn't know what my job is. So I'm showing her. Will you take a picture and send it to Skylar, please? Thank you. Hi, Mom. Okay, so Great Falls. So Great Falls presses charges on this woman. Again, she's from Vaughan. She's not even a citizen of the city of Great Falls, right? She gets an attorney. The attorney says, tell me what happened. She said, well, they made this decision and they just wouldn't listen to reason. I tried to get them to reconsider and they just wouldn't. And they said, wait. They made the decision before you had a chance to do public comment? She said, yeah, consent agenda, public comment, action items. Perfect. So they countersued, and this went all the way up to the Montana Supreme Court. And this is, go back to that number 8 at the top of the page, the right to public participation. The court held, because the city of Great Falls violated her constitutional right to participate prior to final action, everything that happened after that point was a responsibility of the city. So not only could they not charge her or resolve those charges against the detective, but now they have to turn around and be responsible for this. How much does it cost to violate a constitutional right in the state of Montana? And this was well over 10 years ago. What do you think? $180,000. You guys got an extra 200 grand just sitting around? Because you're just loaded with money, right? No. One of our favorite sayings at the center is, if you mess up bad enough, you'll go talk to the judge, and the judge will say, pick your favorite whole number and just start adding zeros until I say stop. In this case, the court said, this is a big deal. We're going to kind of make an example. We're going to award you $500,000 in punitive damages, and the city's responsible for the $400,000 in court costs and attorney's fees. Those are expensive. So almost $1 million, almost 15 years ago, because public comment sat after an action item, not before. That's an expensive few inches of real estate on an agenda, right? And the thing is, I tell you the scary stories. I don't ever want to see somebody who's serving their community in good faith end up on the front page of the IR because of something like that. That's not what we're here for, right? So, and that's part of why the commission and the clerk of the commission's office has been working so hard to set you up for success, to make sure that that doesn't happen. That every time you meet, you are defaulted to meeting the letter and the intent of the law. Okay. All right, I gotta hurry because we want to hear from your city attorney. Questions on agendas, noticing, posting, all of that kind of thing? Public comment? You can't overdo public comment. So what I like to see is public comment at the beginning, at least for items on your agenda, because that's your insurance public comment. And then every time you have an action, I want to see an invitation for public comment, even if there's nobody in the room. And it's awkward. but you're going to do it anyway. Is there any public comment on the item on the table? Nobody else in the room. Is there any public comment on the item on the table? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment and move to the vote. I will every single time, because you're building muscle memory so that when you have that meeting, and at some point you probably will, where the public comes in and they're angry and they're going to exercise their right, I want to make sure that you're protected in following the law so that you don't end up in a world of trouble just because you're trying to do your service. Okay? Thoughts? Questions? Ooh, that is a local policy by ordinance. So it's typically in the bylaws. Is that true? The limit to public comment? Yours is not. Where is it? Practice. Oh, it's practice. Oh, gosh. Okay. So here's what I would say. Whatever you do, do it consistently every time for every person. I'm not going to talk about whether it should be in policy or not because you have a real attorney here. But my concern, the risk is, if I'm that person whose favorite hobby and pastime is to go to the advisory board meeting because I just like it, and you guys let me talk anytime I want for as long as I want because I'm the only person in the room, and then we get to that one meeting where it's very contentious and you lock it down, my argument is now the rules of engagement have changed and there was no expectation that that was going to happen. So you have, in effect, changed my ability to participate. Is that an argument? Absolutely. Yeah. So whatever you do, do it consistently. And I usually encourage the communities to put it in either their bylaws, rules of procedure, or as a standalone policy, as a resolution in the community, so they have something on paper to fall back on. But in this case, if it's a standard practice, talk to this lady because she's the authority. Okay, there's something else. Oh, I was just going to tell you. In Glasgow, apparently in the winter, there's not a whole lot to do because they fought about chickens for like 6 months. And if you ever want to increase public engagement, because people ask us, how do you get people in the room as part of these community meetings? And my tongue-in-cheek response is always, put chickens on the agenda. They'll show up. Glasgow was so serious about that they had to move the council meeting from City Hall to the gym at the high school. And they had full signs, like campaign signs made that said, heck yes, chickens in Glasgow, and cluck no, chickens in Glasgow. And what won? Cluck no. Belgrade went through this for a decade or more, and they finally passed it by citizen vote. The council said, we're not getting in the middle of this. You guys decide, for like the third time. They finally passed it. And 6 months later, we talked to a couple folks, and they said, we've had 2 people come in for a chicken permit. Okay, why? So when we talked to some people in town, and they said, here's the deal. I don't want chickens. I never wanted chickens. But if my neighbor wants chickens, I want them to have the right to have chickens. And for us, because we don't have to live in that community, that is a beautiful example of what democracy looks like at the local level. You get passionate, you get involved, you exercise your rights. It's not always comfortable, but that's how the system's set up, and that's how you become part of that citizen representation. Okay, let's talk real quick about, how are we doing? Ooh, okay, I'm going fast. We're an hour into this, and we've been through 1 statute. Let's go to page 5. So what's the first thing you need to have for a meeting? Quorum. Woohoo! Gotta have the people there. What else do you need? An agenda. Woohoo! What do you gotta do with that agenda? Notice it. What do you gotta allow the public to do? Comment. You gotta do public comment. What is the record of the meeting? Minutes. You have to have minutes for every meeting, not just commission and council meetings. So there's 5 elements. There's a 6th element that I'm not going to ask you to guess because it's kind of niche. Look at 23202. A meeting is a convening of the quorum of the constituent body, whether corporeal or by means of electronic equipment, to hear, discuss, or act on a topic under your jurisdiction. Hear, discuss, or act. That is a really important conjunction. Why? Did anybody else just hear Schoolhouse Rock? Junction, junction. Okay. Why is that important? So how many times have we heard a friend say, well, we had a conversation, but we didn't take any action, so it wasn't a meeting? That's not a thing. If you have a quorum and they hear, discuss, or act, you have a meeting. So if these two things are true, you must have these four to make it legal. Okay? So this comes up a lot in, because it says by corporeal or electronic equipment, right? Phone calls, text messages, emails, shared documents like a Google Doc, Zoom meetings, all of those things. If you have a quorum able to hear, discuss, and or act, you are likely violating open meeting laws. So be very, very careful when you have a quorum, a potential quorum. If there's a job in this state that I would not want, it's a county commissioner. Because who's the legislative branch in the county? The commission. Who's the executive branch? Also the commission. They have to do both parts. When they're in legislative function, when they're in policy decision role, everything they do has to be in the framework of an open meeting. All those conversations, because there's only 3 of them, right? So anytime 2 of them are having a discussion. If they're in executive function, when they're executing those policies, all 3 of them can be in the room and have a conversation, and it doesn't violate the law. But by virtue of their job, how easy would it be to tip over to that legislative side? It's almost impossible not to. So we kind of set them up to, anyway, we won't talk about that. Okay, so if you, let's take the commission, for example. Let's say 2 of the commissioners go to the Carroll game. Do they have a meeting? Not necessarily. They have a quorum if they're sitting together, but they don't necessarily have a meeting. But if 2 of the commissioners are sitting together and I walk up to them and say, hey, commissioners, what do you think about putting a new fire district out on the west side of the county before you get to the top of the pass? Now do they have a meeting? Yep, because they are hearing something under their jurisdiction. So even if you're not the one doing the talking, you could still potentially be violating the open meeting laws. So just be careful with that. Don't put yourself in that position. Also, let's say you have 4 members on a board. Let's say you have 5 members on a board. I'm one of those board members. And you 4 are, sorry, you're going to be our citizen participant, okay? Okay. So you and I see each other at the coffee shop. And I say, oh my gosh, did you see that thing on the agenda? What do you think? And you tell me what you think. Is that a violation of the open meeting law? So there's no quorum, okay? So we have 5 members. What's a quorum? 3, okay? So I leave the coffee shop and I go to the post office and I see you. And I say, oh my gosh, did you see that thing on the agenda? What do you think? I just had a conversation. I want to know what you think. Now do we have a violation? This is what we call a walking meeting or a chain meeting. So a quorum of the body, while not together at the same time, a quorum of the body have had deliberations about that topic outside of the view of the public. So when the 3 of us walk into that meeting, I know how both of those gentlemen are going to vote. So I could vote the same way as them, vote as a block, and you 2 don't get a say. So be careful with the walking meetings or the chain meetings. You don't get to have iterative discussions with everybody, just not at the same time. It's still, in effect, a meeting. Okay. Can you vote by proxy if you're not going to be here? Let's say it's February and you just got to get out of the cold and you're going to go to Arizona for 2 weeks. Just vote yes for me to this thing. We just need to get it through. Can you do that? No. Why? So they have a right to participate prior to action. And if you voted before you got to the meeting where they're going to participate via public comment, how is it that they got to participate before you made a decision? They didn't. They can't. So there's not a statute that says board members of a local government can't vote by proxy. It doesn't say that. But if you do, you are necessarily violating their right to participate prior to action. Does that make sense? Okay. I think I'm going to be done talking for a while if you want to jump up. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. Let me just add that we have 3 commissioners here tonight out of 5 in the city council, city commission. And our clerk back there was very mindful and sent out a PSA to let people know that we weren't going to be talking about anything that was of significant interest to the public or needed a final decision on. And so that is one way to cure if you think that you might show up at a meeting and talk about things that might actually be under your jurisdiction, you can notice that. That's a little more difficult for a board because you don't have the mechanism like the city, a professional, city clerk that sends out and thinks of these things ahead of time. And she thinks of a lot of things ahead of time. And so that is a little more difficult, but you can always let us know and we can help you with the notice on those matters. So I
Love
just
that.
add that.
No, that's great. Because what you're doing there is saying, general public, we know that you know, informed citizens, that we know that we're supposed to be doing this. Because if you don't notice it, and then they find out you were there, what happens to your public trust? Goes down. This is happening in Lockwood right now because the school board wasn't noticing and allowing public participation in a committee meeting, not in the school board, but in a committee meeting. So it costs you something in public trust. And you don't have to necessarily go full on agenda, minutes, all the things. You're just saying there could be an incidental quorum. No city business will be discussed or decided, and you're good to go. Okay, are you gonna be mad if I interrupt you while you talk? Okay. Yes, please. They also don't always follow the 48-hour notice. It's a good question. For some reason, they don't. So we get that question a lot. Why does the legislature not have to follow these same rules? And that is a great question, one that I don't have an answer to. Don't follow them for that example. But yes, you want to be Brittany? Heck yeah.
For us to take a few-minute break. Yeah. Danae, 5 minutes? 5-minute break. Be back in 5. Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to hurry.
No, you're good. This is fascinating. I've been here since May of 2022. Prior to that time, I worked for the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I was honored to work with Chris Smith, who's on the Golf Advisory Board. He was on my hiring committee, actually, back in 2000 when I was hired there. So it was it was a couple of years ago. So I worked there for 22 years, the last 11 of which I was the chief legal counsel there. And in that role, I represented the Fish and Wildlife Commission, the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Commission when it was that. And then when Parks Board broke off, I represented the Park and Recreation Board and many of the advisory committees that were created both by the commission and the board. And there were substantive ones like the Trapper Advisory Committee, and then there were just general citizen advisory committees. And when questions came up, like the ones I'll be presenting about tonight, I was the one that did the training or represented them in those circumstances. So I tell you that only to tell you that I've been in the trenches where you are and done some of the things that you've done. Not as a board member or a board chair, but as counsel, and understand and have seen many examples of disruption, difficult public members, and maybe not just difficult ones, but ones that are really passionate and want to go on and on and on and maybe repeat themselves some, right? Does that sound familiar? I think that one of the examples that I would give you that I dealt with was in the Fish and Wildlife Commission It was in the old Supreme Court chambers in the Capitol at the time with this example. It wasn't always there, but it was late in my career there. And we were talking about the archery regulations, archery only regulations, and a public member came up, very passionate public member who had tried to get a bill passed several times in the legislature to allow for crossbows in the archery only time during Montana. If you know anything about hunting, fishing, and trapping, it is a closely held, a passion by many in Montana. And that was reflected greatly with the commenters that would come to the commission, the boards, the citizen advisory committees. So you often got to see the passion of the people, which, to quote Chris Smith today, is sometimes your greatest attribute is also your greatest downfall. And so the passion of this person what came out while he was commenting, and he had a crossbow with him to show what the crossbow was. And as he was speaking and getting more agitated and elevated, he would point the crossbow. And a crossbow is not like a regular bow. It's got a trigger mechanism. You don't have to hold it back. It looks and acts a little bit more like a gun. And so it's a little alarming when it's being pointed at you in a public meeting, and you could hear audible gasps from the audience. The board chair asked him to please stop pointing it, and he put it down, not realizing he was, and then he'd keep talking, getting agitated again, and would point it again. And at this point, the commissioners were ducking. It wasn't loaded, it wasn't going to go off, but it was alarming to them. And the board chair asked again, will you please not point that at us? And if you keep doing that, I'm going to ask you to leave. It got him a little bit flustered, and he just stopped his comment and left the room. The reason I know that this was an issue with him is because it came back to us through the governor and the director that he was frustrated that his First Amendment right to freedom of speech was infringed upon by the board chair, and asking him and interrupting him and asking him to put his crossbow down. And so from that, I did a training much like this one to advisory committees, to the Parks Board, to the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and tried to help people be able to calm someone when they are agitated. Sometimes you are at a disadvantage when they show up with a weapon, and let's really hope that doesn't happen in any of your board meetings. So, first, it probably is already there. I was wondering if I should have looked at that. I wrote it down so I could check it out, actually. So let's see if we can do this. And I too would like you. Is the clicker on? All right, well, here's the agenda for tonight. I'd like to go through a little bit about, and we already did some of this with Ashley. Thank you. She made my job easier tonight. We did a little bit of this, but there's also some statutory protections for some of the First Amendment rights. We'll go through those. There are categorical exemptions from protected speech, and we'll go through the state law that actually implements those exemptions. We'll go through some of the public meeting space categories created by the US Supreme Court in trying to figure out what level of protection that you are required to provide the public in those different meeting spaces. We'll go through some rules of public decorum during public meetings that might help you a little bit. And oops, see, now it worked. Thank you. And a standard. You already heard Ashley say it's the nuclear option for ejecting someone. That is absolutely true. And I'll tell you what the standard is with a little bit of background from the case law. And then we'll talk a little bit about digital meeting and whether or not there's some differences from what we talk about in-person meetings and the digital platforms that now many do. All cities? No. Okay. Thank you, Ashley. See, one thing I was going to tell you about Ashley, and you may already have gathered this, is that the local government center does this for all the cities across Montana. if indeed they'd like it, if indeed you're invited, I guess. Yes. And the reason I mentioned that is because she turned to me and asked me about the legislative, the head of the executive branch, and whether or not that was true. It's because not every city has the same form of government. And so it gets a little confusing, I would imagine sometimes. Anyway, back to this digital meeting and whether or not there's some differences in how you might look at these disruptive, passionate public members that come to comment at your meetings. Yeah, please do.
I think it's important to keep in mind, well, this is absolutely crucial for you to understand so that you know how to react appropriately if and when you're confronted with that situation, with a contentious topic. It's not to shut them down, right? You are there to encourage that conversation. It's their conversation. It's their service. You're just facilitating that. So we need to walk that fine line of making sure that everybody's acting appropriately, but we want you to have your input, right? We don't want to sit in a silent room with no public comment. So I think having that frame of mind when we talk about all the ways to kind of curtail it is really helpful.
Yes, thank you. You'll hear me say a number of times that it's your responsibility as board chairs and board members to create a safe space so that people from the public want to be there to comment. That's the whole purpose for your existing, right? You are the liaison between the legislature, city commission, and the public, and you can help facilitate that gap between, sometimes gap between city commission and in our case, and the public. So you're there to help protect it. And this is, you'll see, these are ways that you can help protect it. So we already went through this. I'm just wondering if, oh, I did get it right. Good deal. We already went through this, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things. Ashley asked you where the freedom of speech and freedom of expression and all of that is protected for us. And the answer was absolutely the US Constitution and the freedom, or the First Amendment to the Constitution. But interestingly, in Montana, it's also protected under the Montana Constitution at Article 2, Section 7. And I was grateful for Ashley that she brought this. There's a fellow nerd in the room. I love this Constitution. I've read it many times. If you haven't read the Montana Constitution, I absolutely would implore you to do so. We should be proud of the fact that we've got this level of a Constitution. So that's my spiel about it. The Article 2, Section 7 in Montana Constitution says, no law shall be passed impairing the freedom of speech or expression. Every person shall be free to speak or publish whatever he will on any subject, being responsible for all abuse of that liberty. In all suits and prosecutions for libel or slander, the truth thereof may be given in evidence, and the jury, under the direction of the court, shall determine the law and the facts. It's a pretty neat thing to know that our Constitutional Convention found it important enough to them to protect the freedom of speech and expression in our Constitution, not just leaving it to the federal government to do so. That doesn't mean we have extra rights as Montana citizens. It just means we have we found it as a duty to also protect at the state level the rights that you are protecting as board members and board chairs. And so I'm grateful for Ashley to go through this part, but I just want to remind you at this point that it says Congress shall make no law and no law shall be passed. And you as board, in your capacity as board members and board chairs, aren't Congress, and you don't pass the laws as you talked about here. So why would it be that you're responsible to protect these freedoms? And Ashley already told you, you're the scary government now too. You've been created by the commission. You stand in place of the commission, and you get to have the honor to protect these rights and allow for what I call the first line of democracy in local government, and hear from the people you actually live with and work with and play with in your community. I think that's a pretty neat honor, and it should be something that you take and I think you do. I don't know all of you personally, but the ones whom I do know, I know you take it very seriously and you do a great job at making sure the public has a voice. So at the same time we have these rights, the courts have said they are not absolute. The freedom of speech is not absolute. The freedom of expression is not absolute. There are some restrictions on those protections. I tell you this because you will start to see some categories that the public might fit into when they're acting during your meetings. So some of the categories of unprotected speech that have been ruled by the US Supreme Court to be not of social value. This won't be the last time you hear me say this if you ever hear me speak. The answer to why do we have to, why can't we protect these things? And I say, because we live in a society. The society doesn't want to value these expressions of speech. And so they have said, if you're acting in any of these, you will not have protections. I don't need to go through all of them. If you have questions on them, I'm happy to go through them. But one of them that stands out for you is fighting words. Does anyone know the fighting words doctrine? It's pretty commonly known. It's basically words that by their mere utterance incite a breach of the peace or incite violence. So the way I say it is, if you want to punch that guy when he says something to you, that could be fighting words. The standard, you might actually see that, but the standard is not whether or not you as a board member or a board chair feel like you want to punch the guy. It's whether or not the audience is now not able to function because of what someone said. We'll go through that a little bit more. Yeah. So you will find in some circumstances it is hate speech, and some it could be fighting words. In some you can even see it could be incitement. I think it depends on the circumstances, and it's very case law specific. So the answer is it depends. And I don't mean to be, it really does depend. It depends on the factual circumstances, but hate speech is not a specific category that's not protected, but it can fit into these categories that are not protected speech. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to use the it depends answer. In the circumstances that we're talking about, generally it is an egregious action against an individual that the court finds after the fact, sometimes after people are gone. You don't even know how they took it because they're gone now. I mean, murdered, killed, very, violently affected. And so I guess I would say more often it's a court determining whether or not you as the actor, not you, but someone was motivated with hate. Does that make sense? I mean, it's kind of outside of these circumstances, but we can talk about it if you're curious about that. Yeah. Was that? Yeah, you can almost always guess that the reasonable person standard will apply. So another thing that I just wanted to mention is the clean and healthful environment that Ashley mentioned. Going back to the Constitution, that is one of 11 in the country that has it. So go look at the Constitution. They don't. They're not one of them. So moving on, there is laws in Montana. So we talked about the different levels of laws and protections and context for the work that you do. Here is some examples of state laws that when you see these actions in your boards or in front of the commission, they might actually rise to the level of some violations of state law. I'm not saying you should get like Great Falls and get on the bad board behavior YouTube channel, but I am saying that there is a chance that what you see in front of you sometimes are violations of state law. I didn't mean to bring this up, so we'd have to go through every one, but I do like to show you this one, disorderly conduct, because the two I've highlighted here, and did you notice I only highlighted two of them instead of the entire page?
What are you trying to say?
That's how all my law school books look, though. It was all yellow. Yeah. The two here you can see are particularly relevant to boards. A person commits the offense of disorderly conduct when the person knowingly disturbs the peace by disturbing or disrupting any lawful assembly or public meeting. That can be disorderly conduct. It's also creating a hazardous or physically offensive condition by any act that serves no legitimate purpose can be disorderly conduct. You can see this is pretty broad, right? You could probably see that other actions of some of the people that come to your board meetings could be making loud or unusual noises, using threatening, profane or abusive language. Again, I'm not saying you should call in the police when you hear these. I'm just giving you some context for understanding that you have the ability to control the audience when you are in meetings. And perhaps the responsibility to control.
Can I share a story?
Please do. I love Ashley's stories.
We have all the war stories. So this is happening right now, so I won't tell you which community it is. But there is a community in Montana, a small community, less than 2,000 people, who had a very contentious topic that the public was given some false information through a couple of sources, got them really scared. And a lot of the times when you see these behaviors, it's because people are acting out of their fight, flight, or freeze response, their limbic system response. So they are not acting as rational, reasonable adults. Their brain physiologically can't access the part that is nuanced and complex and forward
And logical.
all those things. Yeah. So you're not in neocortex, you're in what we call lizard brain, the amygdala and such. Anyway, so some folks in this small town, very concerned about some decisions that they thought were going to be made that were not going to be made at all. But they came to the meeting. None of what they expected to be on the agenda about that decision was on the agenda because it wasn't a thing. There was no there, right? They were so frustrated. So by the end of the meeting, when their topic didn't come up, was never noticed, any of those things, the mayor hit the gavel to adjourn the meeting. About 15 or so members of the public stormed the dais, threw a bunch of those little constitution books at the council, knocked over their water, called them fascists, all kinds of things. Would that qualify?
Would it qualify as
Or
a
disorderly
disturbance?
conduct?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Definitely would.
So then we get to go talk to him, right? And the conversation that ensued was, why do you think that this is an appropriate behavior? Why do you think that it's appropriate to act like this in the public forum, in the public square? Do you act like this at church? Do you act like this at your kid's school? Why is it okay here? And what we're finding is if you don't explicitly set the expectation for how to behave, i.e. Rules of engagement, you know, your adopted bylaws that say this is how the public engages with the commission. If you don't set that very clearly, they're going to interpret it to whatever best serves their needs, as is natural human tendency. So we need to the kind of behavior letter, lay out what is and is not appropriate, and then hold them to that standard.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. That actually helps with a lot of the rest of this presentation. So it's a good segue into the next part. So these are so government spaces protect the public, no matter who you are and what you do in these ways. But there's different levels of protection that the US Supreme Court have said based upon the government space. So here's three examples, well, three categories that the US Supreme Court has set out Traditional public forum. This to me reminds me of the public square with someone on their soapbox standing at the, at the walking mall downtown and just talking to whomever will show up. That's a traditional public forum. It has the highest level of protection for your rights, for the public's rights to actually speak. It's open all the time, and it's very difficult for government to limit your speech on the public square, as you can imagine. It's also more difficult to actually get the legislature's attention when that's where you go to make your public comment, but that's not what we're talking about right now. Designate, the second one is what you should be interested in mostly, because this is what you are protected. This is your meeting. Designated or limited public forum. You've designated a place traditionally not for open speech and debate. And as long as it's open, it has to be, you have to treat it like it's a traditional public forum. So that means there's limited restrictions on your ability to limit their public comment, as long as they are time, place, and manner restrictions that are equally applied with no viewpoint perspective on them, you can restrict them. And we'll go through what that all means, but that's the only restrictions you can put on their ability to comment. And the last one is a non-public forum. So it's basically a place where you don't usually see speeches. So can you guess what a non-public forum is? It's still in a government space like the city county building, but it's not traditionally where you would go to comment. Can you think of what an example might be? Yeah, exactly. My office, someone else's office. If we had to take the public comment every time someone wanted to come in and public comment, government wouldn't get their work done. So there is a time and a place, and that's designated limited public forum or the traditional public square. So do you have any questions on those? Ashley does.
So if their time and space is during the public meeting, can they interrupt at any point during the discussion?
That is a great question. So you still have a right to have your freedom of speech protected, but time, place, and manner restrictions allow a commission, a board chair to control the meeting. So there's time for public comment, a place for public comment. It's a great segue to so here's sometimes what we do feels like herding cats. It might not be easy. It doesn't feel easy. So let's see. Oh, shoot. We're not going to have any. Have you guys seen this commercial? Yes, one of the best Super Bowl commercials there was. So I'm sorry you can't hear it, but they're herding cats and they're talking about how it's the most important thing they've ever done. And sometimes I think this is what it feels like when you're trying to control the public, right? Sorry you couldn't hear that. So here are some rules of public decorum that I think will help you in keeping control of the meeting. Because going back to what Ashley said and what I mentioned before, it really is important that we create a space that people feel safe to comment. That's your primary role as a board member. It's not necessarily to give your opinion to the commission. It's to hear from the public what they would like so that you can be the person to go and help advise the commission in their decisions. So to do that, to protect that, you should control your meetings. City commission or advisory board meetings are the designated public forum, like we mentioned. When meetings are open to the public, they must be protected under freedom of speech. And the right of public to express their views is not absolute. So time, place, and manner restrictions apply. Can you tell me, just thinking about your meetings, what a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction would be? So you have your, so you have it at a time when people can show up, right? After 5, perhaps. At 6, perhaps. That's a great one. ADA accessible, so people can actually get there. That is a reasonable time. So you're saying it's reasonable for us to restrict it to only the places where people can actually access. Yes, that's a good one. Anyone else? What about the meetings itself? How about the 3-minute, 2-minute time frame? You mentioned, I think, earlier on, limiting public comment to each person gets 2 minutes, I think is for city commission, but I heard 3 perhaps for other boards. And the fact that it's a practice is okay as long as it's applied to every person every time equally. And I can't say that we're always good about doing that in the city commission, but it should be the case that if you're going to do a time limit, you should do it for everyone. I mean, you should. You absolutely need to. Let's go on. The courts have actually said that you can limit time, you can limit the time as long as it's applied to everyone. Repetition is not allowed. I mean, that's also something the court has said you can control. And let's just go to these. Here's examples of time, place, and manner restrictions, and it kind of gets to this. Read rules of decorum at every meeting before every single meeting. I think you're going to cringe a little bit when you see these, because I don't think every board does all of these, but it's my strong encouragement that you do. The more you control the meeting, the more formal a meeting feels, the more formal people will treat it. And it's not because you're trying to limit anyone from coming and saying. In fact, it's supporting their right to be there and have everybody heard in a safe space for them to hear it. It's only a matter of time before someone gets emotional, agitated, and hopefully doesn't show up with a crossbow. But it is something that you should expect will happen, that someone will be passionate about something. Ashley's already talked about chickens, so I'll just throw out the chicken example. No one would have expected chickens were going to be as emotional as they were, and then all of a sudden they're in the gymnasium because everyone showed up. So read rules of decorum, time limits on comments, designate a place for comment, like at the podium, in front of the meeting, even in the middle of the room. Why do you think that's something that could be helpful? Can you think of a reason why? Yeah. It goes back to being able to show people in a very visual way that there's a place where you can comment and there's a place where you should not. So if they're in the circle, like in the camera and not in the camera, if you're in the place where you are allowed to comment, that's where you can be. It just puts a level of formality on a meeting that allows for people to just know. You know, if you've heard the thing about like giving a kid, and I'm not saying everyone's a kid, but lots of people are like kids, and they like to know their parameter, their barriers or boundaries. And this is an example of one of those. These often are examples of that. You require commenters to state their name and address when they speak, even if you know the people. And what does this have to do with their freedom of speech, right? What does this have to do with any of that? Say that again. It could. Right, exactly. It's also a way to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity. Everyone is represented because their name and their address is known. They know where they can be and be safe to say what it is that they want to say. These are all protections for their freedom of speech. It's not a limitation on them. So I would just say, like, even though to Ashley's point, it sounds like I'm saying limit their time, eject them from the meeting. Really what I'm saying is let's create a safe space so no one feels like they have to be agitated, emotional, upset with you. And when they are, you've got some ways to handle it. That comes next. Well, I think mostly because of what I said. There's no official reason why. I think the reason why for me, and the reason why I think it is because it just creates that autonomy. You're autonomous for the comments you make. If you aren't willing to give your name and address, it's like being behind the computer screen and getting to say whatever you want that you wouldn't say if you were in person. So it puts a name, face, and place to the person. No, it's not a requirement. It's really not. Yeah. No, it's not necessary. I mean, I think there are also the circumstances of, you know, you want to differentiate yourself from the other Doug Smith. We have a director whose name is Doug Smith, and he, you know, it's a pretty common name, and that would be a way to differentiate yourself. But it is not a law. It's not a rule that you give your address. It's basically, you know, like what I was saying, for you to be responsible for what your comment is. Yeah. Yeah, please do. Address. Right.
I like how you look at me when you say that.
I was gonna say it too. You didn't. Yeah, and people just do it. They just automatically come up and say their name and address. But that's a really good point.
Can I add something here?
Please.
Most people are not as confident and articulate and well-spoken as your city attorney. It's very uncomfortable for most people to stand up at a podium and talk to a board, a panel of people in front of a room of even more people. Everybody's angry, right? Part of your job is to invite them in and show them the ropes about how they can have their voice heard. And that goes back to the 3-minute time period. It's not so that we're limiting your time, but so that everybody has access to it. So as much as you can, encourage them through reading the things, what you can and can't do, those kind of things. But I like to see meeting chairs say, in our meetings, we like to ask for public comment after the motion's on the floor, but prior to calling for the vote. So you'll see on your agenda, public comment times are highlighted in yellow. The chair will ask for the public comment at least 3 times during that time period. You're welcome to come up, form a line, do all the things. Once everyone has had an opportunity to comment, we will close the public comment period. At that point, we'll go back into board discussion, and you probably should tell them, you are invited and encouraged to speak during public comment, but you cannot interrupt the discussion of the board during board discussion. You don't have standing, basically. But tell them when they're going to be able to talk so they don't get antsy and think they're going to miss it. Make sure they understand how it's going to be called out, what's expected of them. We'll ask you to come to the podium. We'll ask you to state your name, share your thoughts. We'll put a timer up here. You and everyone else can see how much time is left, so it's not going to jump out and surprise you when you get close. Set it up so that they can feel as comfortable as possible. For the vast majority of the world that did get the gene that's uncomfortable with speaking in public.
Right.
And give them a chance to participate in a way that they have a right and an expectation to.
It's like we planned it. Ashley is perfect segue to the tips and tricks for calming disruptive public. I liked this comic here. And while there's no reason yet to panic, I think it only prudent that we make preparations for panic. So that's kind of what this is. We don't need to panic yet. There's nobody here is expecting that the public's going to show up angry. But if they do, let's have some tricks, right? So allow the commenter to finish. You've got somebody that's angry, agitated, pointing a crossbow at you, and you have a 2-minute time frame. They do it 10 seconds before the end. Do you need to disrupt them and ask them, or could you just let the time go? I say that because, I mean, the crossbow example maybe isn't the greatest example because no one wants a weapon pointed at them, and maybe you should always tell them to put it down when that's happening. But the point, I guess, is that one way to just let this be is just let them comment, run it out, ask them to promptly leave. If they don't, then you remind them, your time is up. Please wrap up. If you don't have time limits, wait until they start to repeat themselves. That has been protected by the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court, that if they're repetitious, unduly repetitive, off topic, you can ask them to wrap it up. And where that came up was in the context of actually disrupting the meeting. These are people who go on and on and on, not when you have a 3-minute time limit. But this is when you don't have the time limit and they just keep going and repeating and not letting the rest of the meeting happen. You can ask them to please be done because you don't, unless they have something new to add. So you can remind them of the rules of decorum. If you actually read it ahead of time, you can say, please be respectful of the rules of decorum. And I would suggest that you meet them with a calm voice and look them in the eye. These are all facilitation tactics that when you're in a meeting, you're facilitating a meeting, this is how you make sure that you can do it properly. It's the same thing with the board meeting and making sure that disruptive public know that you're in control. Ask the if you don't have rules, ask them to be respectful of others for language or time or whatever it is that is the issue that's before you. Always keep your voice level, eyes on the speaker, you as the board chair. Even board members can have the same help to the board chair. Designate someone to calmly stand next to him. If there's somebody who's really agitated, you can actually ask ahead of time someone who feels comfortable to just go stand next to him. It's uncomfortable to carry on when all of a sudden you've got someone in your space. And I'm not saying, get in their face, get in their space. I'm saying calmly stand next to them. If there's someone who is being difficult and not allowing your meeting to continue. No. So don't box out. Remind the audience if you hear from the audience, because sometimes that happens. They get them riled up. They might even ask questions of the audience. Who here agrees with that? And pretty soon the audience is in. Remind the audience that they'll have their time to speak when the speaker's done, and please remain quiet. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's really important to establish ahead of time that public comment first is not public Q&A and it's not public debate.
Yeah.
We're not going to get into a this for that. And this, I will say, the legislature does this very well.
Yeah.
They don't get to, so especially for those committees that do have staff liaisons, the public doesn't get to come in and grill that staff member for 3 hours. That's not what they're there for. The staff member's there to inform the body, the board. The public is there to inform the board. The public is not there to just go after this staff member, right? So it's that. And I think it's also important to remember that if you have a member of the public that's saying, I can't do it in 3 minutes, this is unfair, this is unconstitutional, blah, 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 they can give you written comment.
Absolutely.
And they may give you much better comment if it's written comment.
Right.
So that's an option.
Yeah. And yeah, I think I looked here and I have it somewhere in here that it's speaker is addressing the board and not the other public members. And you just be, again, control, the meeting. You have control of the meeting. And even if they start to ask questions, just say, it's not the time for question and answer. I can answer that after the meeting. Or maybe you want to designate some time for question and answer, and then you've got a very specific time and place for them to get their questions answered. Or even better, the board starts asking the question and then allows somebody to come up. You know, I would like Joe Q Public to answer this question, and then you direct it to them. So these are just things. Come to the city commission meeting. They do a great job of handling that. And making sure that there's control in the room. It's a great thing to come. If you haven't spent some time there, I encourage you to spend some time there to watch the decorum, the public, the interaction. Hopefully you don't see too many disruptive public, but you might. And then the two last ones I would say are next to the nuclear option. If it's starting to get to the point where you cannot control this person and you see it escalating, take a recess, recess the meeting and let people calm down. Come back in 10 minutes. If that doesn't work, you can adjourn the meeting. You can even tell them, if you can't calm this down, I'm going to adjourn the meeting and we'll be done tonight. And that is another, that you're not affecting anyone's freedom of speech at that point, because there's no more meeting. So, and then you can, you know, unfortunately, you'd have to bring it at another time, but I don't think that's going to happen in your board meetings. These are just the what ifs and the what if fairy coming to visit you.
Let's say we have that grandstanding back. How do you, I like to practice this.
Yeah.
In real time. So they're up there, they're talking, they won't stop talking, and the chair says it's time for a recess. How do you do that? They're still
How
talking.
do you physically do it?
Yeah.
So there, again, what if you've done all that and none of it works? Can you eject the person from the meeting? So yes, you can. I would suggest that before you do that, you give the notice. If you don't stop talking, I'm gonna have to adjourn the meeting. You can adjourn the meeting. You hit the gavel. You can tell people it's time to leave. If they continue to talk and they don't want to leave, let them sit there and talk. If it starts to become disruptive, people are getting agitated in the audience, you can actually eject the person from the meeting. And that is protected by the Ninth Circuit, actually, in a case. I'm not really using my notes, so I'm gonna go and make sure that I get this right. There's there's a standard that you can use if you're going to kick somebody out. And I don't know that you were talking about kicking people out. You use it as the nuclear option. You know, that's what this is here. And there's a standard for that. Norris v. City of Santa Cruz and the Acosta versus City of Costa Mesa, both of which are in the Ninth Circuit, which is our circuit in Montana. In this case, in the Acosta case, the city council was dealing with an agreement for their police to actually act as immigration agents in the city of Costa Mesa. Acosta was an advocate for undocumented immigrant workers, and he stood to speak at two different meetings. In the first meeting, he called the mayor a racist pig. He then said it two more times, elevating it to a fucking racist pig during the meeting. And then in the second meeting, in that same meeting, he was speaking to the audience, asking them questions, and they were clapping and standing. So you can see how at the first time he said this, you should have handled the situation, maybe even adjourned the meeting, asked him to stop. They let it go on until it got to this point. And then the mayor recessed the meeting to calm them. The police tried to escort him out of the meeting, and he kept talking and wouldn't leave. So again, Ashley was really good preview to what we were going to talk about. Police tried to guide him out the door and he resisted. And the court found this disruptive enough, you think, to eject him from the meeting room. So In the circumstance we're talking about, it got even more egregious than what Ashley was talking about. He used some pretty offensive language. You know, some of these tactics, I don't know, because the court doesn't say what actually happened prior to them getting to the third time and the recess and all of that. But I would hope and I would think that if you control your meeting, it doesn't have to get to this point. It still will in some circumstances, and maybe that was the case here. But it's my hope it doesn't get to this point if you use some of the control tactics in your meeting. So what the court said is that an ordinance or rules, practice, put in whatever it is that however you're controlling your meeting and under whatever authority, like board, chair authority, that governs the decorum of the city council meeting is not facially overbroad or unlawful. If it only permits a presiding officer to eject an attendee for actually disturbing or impeding a meeting. And you can see that that was disturbing, right? And that's pretty clear example of disturbance. In the other case, Norse, a public member, this is interesting because it's the opposite circumstance. A public member did a Nazi salute after the public comment ended. And another meeting, he whispered to another member in the audience, and the court found that wasn't disruptive. Why do you think that was? Any guesses? The reason why this became a case is because one of the board members said to him, that's unacceptable, you're out of here, and ejected him from the meeting. He got up and left willingly, but ejected him from the meeting. The city tried to claim that public comment was done. We didn't have any responsibility to protect his rights of freedom of speech at that point. Public comment was done. And the court said, that's not disruption because, does anyone have a guess? It didn't actually disturb the audience. You saw in the video, nobody even rustled. They kind of went like, oh God, what's going to happen next? So it didn't disrupt the meeting. And so the standard is actual disturbance or disruption or actually impeding the meeting. So you can see why Ashley says this is the nuclear option, right? Yeah, you know, I thought that too. I didn't actually see the video. I'm assuming by the description from the case that when they said it was frozen, people were like, I'm gonna ignore the guy. That's kind of how it was, because he didn't make a noise. He literally just did the symbol and that was it. And let me just say right here, I'm not defending the guy in what he did. I'm stating facts and telling you what how the court saw it. And then there's always things we're missing because we don't know the actual circumstance. We just get what's in the court. So
I think considering that it didn't disrupt the proceeding of the conduct of business.
yes,
Right? So
exactly.
you can stand in the back, do yoga, have at it.
Yep.
We can still conduct our business.
Yep.
So as long as it's not interrupting that process.
Yep.
And then making the audience feel like they can.
Yes, exactly. The court in that case was really pretty pointed in its decision about it having to be actual disturbance. I mean, they went through saying, you know, the court said it had to be actual disruption, not constructive, technical, virtual, nunc-pro-tunc, imaginary. So they were it felt to me like they were pretty offended by by what the city did in ejecting this guy in this proceeding. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes, absolutely. All of the things that we talked about here, wait, let's see. Here, you can still do. All that was if you're considering ejecting someone from the meeting, The standard is actual disturbance, an actual disturbance. But you could still say, please respect others in the audience. That's disrespectful. And let that be. And I think there's a lot of best practices. Like you will see elevation of tactics if it doesn't stop. And so these are ways to not to calm it before it gets elevated. And I would say, go to these every time before you go, even think about ejecting. And like I said, you can adjourn the meeting. No one's there for him or her to speak anymore. So be all disruptive you want in the empty meeting room.
Have at it.
Have at it, yeah.
Well, and I think thinking about what Becky said about facilitating and facilitator skills, it starts with education, right? So if somebody's going way over their time, you ask them to wrap it up. And then in between public comments, the chair could say, chair just wants to remind the public that you are here with a 3-minute time limit. So please keep your comments to 3 minutes. And you just kind of do it for everybody, right? And then the next level up is, ma'am, we asked you to keep it to 3 minutes. You're now at 5.5 minutes. Please wrap it up in the next 15 seconds. And then they won't stop talking. So the chair says, so as they're talking, I would entertain a motion for recess for 10 minutes. So moved and seconded, the votes have it. It's approved. We will recess for 10 minutes, come back at 6:25. So you're doing that while they're talking. So you have escalation of interference.
Absolutely. That was the great, I should have been like giving you some like cues, and that was a really great way of illustrating how to handle a meeting when someone's being difficult. Yeah. So here's some examples of actual disturbance that cases have dealt with and found actual disturbance. Now we don't have the circumstance. So going back here, I just want to point out, I don't have a pointer, I don't think, nope. It's measured by the effect on the audience, not by board members. So if you feel offended and you want to go, oh, if the audience doesn't care, that doesn't matter. It's an actual disturbance in the audience, and that's how you determine the ejection criteria. Excessive language or action has impeded the ability of the body to get through the agenda. So that's kind of the bottom line. So offensive or disrespectful gestures. So I went through lots of cases and found these examples where they found an actual disturbance, but you really have to know the factual circumstances. But I just want to show you how minimal it can look from your perspective. And then if it actually disturbs the meeting, you still have the right to do something about it. So an offensive or disrespectful gesture. The Nazi salute could have been an actual disturbance if the audience had reacted, but they didn't.
Why is that better? It's not their decision, right?
Right. Thank you. That's a really good point to come back to. And that's your job, our job as government is to protect their right and for a safe space for us to exercise our fundamental rights of freedom of speech. Transparent government, all of that is protected by allowing a space where people don't have to feel offended, have their meeting disrupted, where they're just trying to see how the government works. And I think that is a really good point to reiterate time and time again, because I can get into the details of these cases because they're super fascinating. I have spent hours on these cases because they're really fascinating. But what it comes down to is just protecting the right of the people to be there and feel safe to speak what they want to speak to the government. So this is, do the same tips, tricks, and rules apply to a digital platform? Yeah, Commissioner. That is such a good question. And I toyed with the idea of saying, what happens if you have a disruptive board member? How do you handle that? I didn't get into that because there's I could go on for another hour perhaps. But you all in your role as board members control and have an effect. Is censure allowed in certain circumstances? Yes. It's still the absolute nuclear option to kick somebody out of a meeting, even if they're a disruptive board member. That's still a nuclear option, but it is a different standard. So we can talk about that sometime if you're really curious, because I think it's another fascinating twist on this same subject, that there are some differences because there's a different level of expectation to board members when they're actually governing, and certainly of legislators when they're legislating, that you also don't always see applied in Congress or our legislature. Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I say this and I'm pretty sure I offend people, but it's true. I have a 20-ish month old daughter. It is remarkable how much parenting a toddler is like working with the public. They get into that dysregulated state and you're not going to get to them with logic. The facts, the figures, the rules don't matter. The best thing, probably tell me, that I tell people you can do is, I hear you. I know this is frustrating. I can see you're passionate, validating that this is important to me and I have to be heard. We hear you. And then let them come back through the limbic bridge to access their neocortex, the rational part of their brain, which could take anywhere from 30 seconds to a few days, right? Maybe don't hang out for a few days and wait for them to come back, but just like, and most of you are probably parents, just like dealing with that underdeveloped sense of kind of executive function. If you can see somebody is deeply into that dysregulated state, let it be, let there be a pause for a minute and let them know you hear them. Yes, toddlers in public. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you all heard that, but other board members can actually help with that dysregulated state and any other disruptions by just being that calm presence and helping regulate as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you could say, like, if you're the chair and I'm over here just, you're not listening to me, I'm trying to tell you something. And Alex is another board member. She could say, Member Kent, I think what I'm hearing you say is X. Chair, are you understanding that what she's saying is this point? Because now she's my adversary, right? So now I have another ally. Whether Alex agrees with me or not, she's just saying, I hear you. And that goes a long way to help people feel like they're at least, there's something on the other side of the chasm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's right. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on this. The standards are the same, but how much can you see an audience to determine whether or not they're being disrupted when there's a digital platform? That's a little more difficult, isn't it? So we're running out of time, and so I want to get to a case study on this. So I just want to throw out there that I do think this will be an evolving place. I think we will get some guidance on this eventually. There's not much that has percolated yet but there's a ton of law. There's a ton of case law on the pandemic and Zoom and all of that. But I would just throw out there, thinking about this as a board chair, can you mute somebody? Is that the same as, you know, ejecting them from a meeting? Yeah, the reason why, do you have a reason why you would say no? Yeah, yeah, if it's escalated to the point where you have to mute them. Right? Yeah, you know, I guess the point I was getting to, similar to what you just said, is that it's hard to assess how people are reacting to this. It's also difficult to, well, it's easier to mute them. It's easier to eject them if that's the way you want to see it. But there's also the options for putting in the chat feature and allowing somebody to read it to the board. That's not really an option in an in-person meeting. If you eject someone or you mute them, they're done commenting. And that's a little different in a digital platform. No, it's not live. You can actually comment and Danae will read it into the record. And and that's all. Am I right about that, Danae? Yeah. Thankfully, right? I know what you're going to talk about, and I would if you didn't.
I've had that.
And I don't remember, I can't remember. Everybody had ear and headlights.
Like, who is in charge of that? Yeah, that's okay. It's perfect. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
People that set up the Zoom were in Glendive doing the same meeting. So we had Zoom bomb live on the screen and none of us could shut it down.
Oh, gosh.
People are gone.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is a case study. It's made up, if you couldn't tell. The Chicken Coop Advisory Committee. I used chicken because I wasn't sure if anyone was going to bring up chickens, and you can't have a meeting without talking about chicken. So the Chicken Coop Advisory Committee meeting in the City County building, room 326, noticed as a public meeting with an agenda. Free the Chickens advocacy group is going to show up, is there. You know that they're loud and angry people. They're very passionate. And for the plight of the chickens, you're the chair. You cannot stand the views of this group. You haven't told anyone. I just happen to know this. And the chickens are, you believe chickens are domesticated animals and are not meant to be free. Their worth is in their eggs. And you call the meeting to order and go to the first agenda item, which is about the chickens and coops that the city's giving away, which is true story, by the way. But that's another thing to talk about later. So I would like, I have another slide. I'd like, as I'm going along and reading this, for you to interject and tell me what you would do if you were the board chair. Okay. So if you don't, I'll call on you. So the leader of the group walks to the front of the room to give public comments. You've not implemented time limits. You don't know how long this is going to go on. He starts with comment about the inhumane treatment of chickens, and he's visibly agitated. He continues. He asks that you be removed as the chair because you're pathetic and hopeless and a poor excuse for a human being. Do you interject at that point? I wouldn't. Yeah. Okay, I didn't say that. So he asked the audience to raise their hands if they agree, and a few hands go up. Yes. How would you interject at that point? Yes. Ask the person to address the board only at that point. And you do it calmly, even keeled. Yes, good job. So he tells the advisory board to do their fucking jobs. I like when I get to swear on stage and advise the commission to create rules for humane chicken ownership. Does anyone interject at that point? None? Yeah, I think so. If you have read the rules of decorum, did you notice I didn't say you read the rules of decorum? If you have rules of decorum about language and being respectful, you remind them of that. But otherwise, you just remind, please, there's other people in the audience, don't use that language. Do you do both of those? Like if this keeps going, do you keep reminding them? So now you've interrupted them twice? I think you do. Because what it looks like to me, and what I've meant, I wrote it, so that's not fair. But what it looks like to me is that it's elevating and that he's getting agitated, I said he, right? I'm not, yeah, he. And that, the audience is now getting involved. You're worried about losing control. So now if you in the audience are clapping, it's getting off the rails, right? Yes. Yes. Again, please let me remind you again, this time is for the commenter. Please keep quiet and respect the comments. You have your turn if you would like to come up next. He's approaching 10 minutes now, discussing areas within the city that should allow free roaming chickens. I would actually interrupt at some point in this if he's becoming repetitious and getting off topic. We're talking about the city's program to give away chickens and chicken coops, and he's talking about inhumane treatment and places where they should roam free, and how the board is not worthy of making these decisions. At some point, it's gone off the rails and he's off topic, repetitious, and other people need the opportunity to comment. Someone at the audience yells at him to wrap it up and he turns around and calls him a really bad name. At this point, I think you've lost control. What would you do? Yeah, recess. I would just say, I'd entertain a motion to recess the meeting for 10 minutes. Thank you, we're recessed. Even if you, and then you get up and walk out. Yeah, I mean, you don't give them a forum anymore. So audible gasp can be heard, some leave. Obviously, this is an actual disruption. It's impeding the meeting. It's impeding the meeting because we're going 10 minutes on now and no one else has gotten to talk. So that's what I've got for you. Thank you for being such good attentive. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. That's sensitive because you didn't have time limits for others. So you let this guy go on for 10 minutes and someone who has a comment that might take, longer than you'd give them would say, you let that guy go, you didn't let me go. So I guess my suggestion is that you all have time limits and you apply them evenly. It can be 5 minutes. If you don't have people that generally come and comment, it can be a 10-minute public comment. Although then I would ask, is that really a time limit? But you can put a time limit on these now and start implementing it. Start implementing rules of decorum. Allow people to start knowing that you're going to control it. And you can say it's not because we want to limit you, it's because we want to protect everyone. You can probably guess the reason why I'm up here is because there have been examples of difficult things that have happened in board board meetings, advisory board meetings. And so it'll come to you next. Stay tuned for a disruptive public coming to you next. So. Right?
They're saying you bring some of the board meeting. Maybe have a little bit more other alternatives, some other reasons.
Another agenda, right? Yeah, hopefully these things that you can do can help control and not let it get out of control that way. Are there any other questions? You can have them on the agendas, absolutely. Yes. In fact, you, I bet Danae has something to say about that. It's like we planned it this way. Oh, oh. And talk about all the things that, yeah, which they'll clean up. Thank you all for being so attentive. It's fun to talk to a group that talks back.
Thank you. I see there's still some people out in the lobby, and hopefully I'm a loudmouth and they'll start hearing me talk, so they're either running away or they're going to tell people that I'm yammering on in here. So as I said, I want to be respectful of everyone's time and not keep you here all night. I really genuinely appreciate you being here. This is super important. I won't cover a lot of the stuff that I had planned on because I don't want to browbeat you with the same points over and over again. So we'll fly through a few slides if you'll indulge me. Okay, we're getting most people back in. So my name is Danae Claiborne. I am the clerk of the City Commission. For those of you that don't know me or haven't spoken with me before, I have with me this evening the Deputy Clerk, Alex Montiel. So if you guys get boards, emails, or correspondence, generally they're coming from Alex. Thank God for Alex, because she keeps me generally at like a 7 instead of an 11 and keeps me organized. What I'm going to cover this evening is a little bit about why we're doing the boards project. And some of you in this room have heard me talk about it before. Some of you have gone through a process, as painful as it has seemed sometimes. I'm going to give you a brief history about why we did the boards project, how we got to here. I'll talk a little bit about the organizational structure of the city, which might help explain some of the reason that I'm here right now. So that's all right. We'll get started. I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. One is that on the back of the agenda is a sheet that Alex created, and it's a very simple quiz. It's just to ensure that you were taking away some basic items from this training tonight. It also is the attendance. As you well know, probably at this time, if you have received an email, the City Commission is requiring the board and committee members that represent city to participate in one board's training a year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I do get some questions pretty regularly about why we have to do it once a year and not just once a term. And I actually just spoke with the commissioner earlier about that concept. Some of you have spoken to me directly about that. I will say, I've sat through these presentations countless times. I've learned something every time. They always change, and the rules are always changing. The public you engage with, they're always changing. So I think it's really important, like any muscle in our body, we need to flex it and exercise it occasionally. So while it may seem tedious, you are a very important part of this structure, and we really want you to understand as a city organization and as a representative of the commission, as their staff person, that they take this seriously. They want you to take it seriously. So once a year, you'll get a Jimmy John's sandwich, some chips, glaze over for 3 hours, but hopefully walk away feeling like you took something away from this training that you didn't last year. So I really appreciate you being here. Yay! Holy mackerel! Can someone write that down? I didn't think I'd hear that tonight. So we did do the housekeeping with the attendance sheet / quiz. Staffs or the sign-in sheet up there. If you haven't signed in, please also sign in there. Follow up on a couple of topics that came up tonight. So if you all will bear with me for a few more weeks, Ashley talked a little bit about how government works at a glacial pace, and that's for a good reason. We want to get as much input from everyone that is necessary on all of our policy decisions at a staff level, in addition to get the best direction from the commission. And that's who I work for. I work for the commission. We are currently working on an electronic meeting policy / resolution. Becky and I have talked a little bit briefly about it. I'm going to be bringing that forward after she and I go through the nuts and bolts of it. I actually sat through a summit with Dan Clark, Ashley's partner in crime, last week, and he was talking about parliamentary procedure in public meetings, and very much the topics that we're talking about this evening, and decorum. He spent 2.5 hours answering a lot of questions from folks from smaller towns who have the same problems you all do in your board meetings and at their council meetings. And he said, you know, this is really complicated stuff. And after he finished, I raised my hand and I said, so Dan, I want you to apply everything you just described to an in-person meeting to an online meeting now. And think about how much more complicated it can get, to Becky's point, because you're not engaging with that person one-on-one in real life. It's an entirely different ballgame. And there are communities across the country that are grappling with this topic. Some have just gone I'll call it the easy way out, and they've decided to adopt a resolution that simply says, we allow electronic meetings, period. There are some communities that have clearly been through the paces. Commissioner Logan referenced the infamous Zoom bomb at the City of Helena. I was at the helm that evening, thank you. I won't go into the dirty details, but you've never lived until you've seen an 89-year-old board member staring at some very graphic porn front and center on their screen, and his face, like the Brady Bunch, is the only thing you're seeing. And he was smirking because, I mean, what else are you gonna do? We, in 2019, we didn't know what we were dealing with. This was a whole new world order. And since then, we've tried really hard at the city to be very sophisticated about how we approach these meetings at a commission level. The commission has determined, as some of you well know, that every meeting that's a public meeting, and that means you all in this room, shall participate in a digital realm. And that is to open access to their government and to your processes as much as possible. And so what we're working on is that resolution to answer some of the questions that you have brought up here this evening. My hope and my job is to work with the city attorney and the commission to take a lot of the thought out of it for you, so you don't have to guess. That policy is in writing. So in that moment, if you'll never be facing, I promise you, in this lifetime, a Zoom bomb the way I did, because we've put measures in place now to prevent that. It's one of the reasons we use webinar. If some of you work as a chair with your staff liaison, you've probably heard this. We use webinar so people don't get the same access to the electronic meeting that they might otherwise. But we've thought this through. I spend way too much time thinking about it. So I promise you that we're going to take a lot of the guesswork out of it for you, because you don't do this for a living and you shouldn't have to spend that time. So that policy is coming. The decorum discussion, we're also working on. So it turns out decorum and electronic meetings, it's too much to package in one resolution. It's really complicated. The commission has gone through several meetings where they've talked with me about potential revisions to their bylaws, how they might want to handle some of these complicated questions you've brought up here tonight. What I am proposing to them is that we instead adopt at the City of Helena, very much like some of the other municipalities have, a public meeting policy. How we're going to handle our public meetings. It's something that the City of Helena has never done before. A lot of what we talk about in these rooms, they've been practices. I think you've probably heard that even a lot over the last 5-6 years. A lot of what we thought were laws were just norms. We accepted them as a practice, but they weren't really written down and there was no accountability associated with them. So what we've been working on with the commission is to find ways to take that guesswork out and hold others accountable. And that's not just the public. That's your fellow board members. That's staff. Everybody understands the ground rules when they walk into a public meeting. That's the goal. So again, that'll be coming soon, hopefully in the next month or so. And we'll talk a little bit more with that. I haven't figured out how exactly we're going to, other than the regular public meetings and discussions with the commission, how we're going to maybe go about producing that specifically for you board members, but we will definitely think that through. What else? 2-minute time limit. Somebody brought up time limits on public comment. So the commission has never had that policy in place. It has been a practice. The mayor said this last year because we started to see an escalation that he wanted to start instituting as the presiding officer at our meetings, a 2-minute time limit. I will fully admit that is my fault when it's not universally applied. We've tried different methods to do that. We don't really have a really good timer method established yet, although Zoom recently came out with one. So some of you may have noticed if you watched the commission meeting last night or were there, I was trying to be very diligent on doing all the things I have to do to run the meeting and also watch the timer. I missed it once. I was very mad that I missed it once last night. So that is coming as well. Again, the commission and the mayor are going to talk that out about what's an acceptable time limit. To Ashley and Becky's point, we want it to be universally applied. So whether or not that gets applied at a board meeting level, that is a commission discussion. As you all know, you serve at the pleasure of the commission. Scripts, related to Becky's topic, we've already been working on scripts for all of you so that you can read them aloud, put them on your agendas. The commission is we're moving through a process right now to switch out our agenda software because it was sold, we have to. So those scripts about decorum are going to be applied to our agendas. We're just waiting for that new software to come in. We'll do the same for you. Again, some of what we're going to talk about tonight is the templating that we've done in our office to take some of that guesswork out for you. If you haven't had an opportunity to watch paint peel and come to a commission meeting some night, no offense, commissioners, but we have instituted a lot of the practices that we'll put in policy coming up. And that includes the decorum to a limited scope. The mayor reads the same script at the outset of every meeting. He talks a little about what the expectations for the electronic meeting. We're going to expand upon that and clarify a few things. And again, we'll probably be looking for direction from the commission to whether or not they want to apply that same practice to all of you. Covered that, FAQs, kind of the same thing. So with that, I'll scoot ahead as fast as I possibly can at this point. I mentioned this, or I wanted to bring this slide up because Ashley talked a little bit about it. As I said, I'm the clerk of the commission and Alex is the deputy. So Helena's a little odd in the sense that we are different than the other big seven, big eight. I got to get used to saying that. Belgrade is now part of the tier 1. In that my office, the clerk of the commission, we are outside the organizational structure for the rest of the city. And so you'll see that I, as the clerk, I am the only other staff person at the city level other than the city manager that responds and is the staff person for the commission. And then I have the direct reports under me in the office, and that includes the HCC coordinator for, I don't know if there's any HCC folks here this evening, but their coordinator also works under the legislative branch in the commission office. So I am essentially I manage the legislative affairs for the city. I also serve an administrative purpose as the records manager for the city. So that kind of swings over into the realm of the city manager's area. And I think Ashley did a pretty apt job talking about the difference between those two. I do like this. I stole this from Local Government Center. I'll give full credit. This does demonstrate that that line doesn't exist, you notice, from the legislative side to those department heads. We're going to talk a little bit about that throughout my slides, and that is roles and responsibilities and why that's important in order for the board's organizational structure and recommendations that come to the commission to function properly. Everyone needs to know their role. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So, does anyone have any idea how many boards the City of Helena has? Does anyone have a guess? You've heard this before. Good guesser, yeah. So we have approximately 33 boards, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I want to talk a little bit about why we have boards in general. So we have them for public engagement, community representation, policy development, specialized knowledge and diverse experience. What we're getting into here, you'll see, is a delineation, and Ashley spoke about this a little bit. We have administrative or specialty boards, and those folks maybe work a little bit more on the operational side. The advisory boards that we've talked about primarily in the early stages of the boards project are those folks that report and are making policy level recommendations to the commission. And it's not that their work wasn't important, but they were kind of the low-hanging fruit. When we get into these administrative or specialty boards, some of them have statute that applies to them or code, and that complicates matters. So I just want you to understand that policy development can happen at both levels on these boards. Policy can be used to help inform staff, or the city manager in our case, who then directs his staff underneath him, just like the policy can be developed and for the use of the city commission. So how Helena got here. The history of the boards project is in 2019. I started to get direction from the previous commission makeup that they were sort of tired of things not moving along in a manner that they thought was professional, or that they weren't getting good recommendations, or is inconsistent. And it started with, we don't have an application process per se. So what we started with was an application process. We revised, we rethought how we go about recruiting the board members in this room. And so we started doing sort of a quasi HR process so that we started to set a new standard and help people understand you're a part of something very important. We want you to take it seriously. It's not that we don't want you to enjoy going to your board meetings and having coffee and cake and donuts if that's what you buy for your board members. We want you to take it seriously. We want you to show up and understand you're part of the government now, and that you may inform the decision makers ultimately that impacts tax dollars. So last night, One more got added. I didn't do anything. So part of my role at the legislative level is to be the board's manager for the City of Helena, which is part of the reason that some of you may know me as Darth Vader. I will tell you this. I think the board's project sometimes gets a bad rap. And I say that understanding from the outside looking in, it probably feels that way sometimes. Change is hard. And if you're used to being able to operate a certain way, and then mean old clerk comes in and is like, the commission said this, and I'm going to make you do this, it probably feels a little punitive sometimes. I will tell you the number one goal that the commission wanted was to provide consistent process so everyone got a fair say in what came forward. And that's not always easy. It meant that some people were way back behind the finish line because they were meeting up, having coffee, not talking about anything, didn't have an agenda, didn't know what they were going to do. And then they're like, well, see you next month. Never getting anything done. And then some folks were way in the weeds. They were advising staff, directing staff, telling others how they should go about doing their business. Even members of the public. We had members reaching out to state senators. We had members of boards reaching out to federal senators, saying that they were part of the city government. Knowing your roles was really important to the commission and helping people understand that they belong all at this one space. So in 21, we had a meeting and they gave me some direction along with the city attorney and the city manager at the time. Well, that city manager, she resigned at some point. That city attorney jumped ship and went to the Montana League of Cities and Towns, traitor. Guess who's left standing at the end of it with the direction from the commission? And they were like, go figure it out. So what we did to the best of our ability with our limited staff was come up with ways to template so much of what you guys have talked about tonight and make it easy on you. Okay, that was our first goal. We needed to have an established way to track our membership and to keep retention. We wanted to know who was coming and going out of the boards. That didn't exist before. And so we established a database that is the central hub to communicate with staff liaisons. So we all know who's on what and what those folks are responsible for, what their terms are. If they leave, we now know that they left. We can track when they come and go. And some of that seems probably simple. When you're dealing with 33 boards, now 34, hundreds of people, it's quite complicated, I can assure you. So then the governing policies that they wanted to see resolutions created because we did have some boards that once upon a time were created essentially in minutes. It was like, hey, this is a great idea. And we're at the commission meeting. We should have a board and we have some people here that are engaged. Therefore, we will create this board. And that was basically it. Well, then there's no guidance, there's no scope and purpose established. And so folks don't know what they should be doing. And guess what that ultimately results in? Frustration, right? So we also did member terms, officer organization, and a secretary, and that's pretty new. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end of this presentation, and Alex is going to take you through some of the secretary's responsibilities. I will encourage those of you that have been asked that are like, no way, that sounds like a lot of work. Alex has worked really hard to try and make it as simple as possible for those of you that are secretaries or thinking about it or have been asked. You are the most important person, as far as I'm concerned, on that board. You are the record keeper. That's what I do. So of course you're important. But I would say that the secretary's job is instrumental to the public participation process. And we want to make it easy for you, but we also want to encourage you to get involved at that level. So definition of a quorum and as well a method to comply with open meeting law. Because as we keep browbeating you a little bit about this tonight, there was this notion at some point that boards and committees did not have to comply with open meeting law, and that is just not true. You are the government. You represent the community to the commission. And ultimately, the standard that we looked at when we were trying to come up with methodologies was that the way you inform the commission may impact tax dollars at the end. It may take a long road to get there, but you may cause the expenditure of tax dollars. And that is a huge high standard that we want you to meet. In 22, there was an additional directive, and this was coming from the commission, and they said, all of this stuff is really great, but we really don't understand how recommendations are supposed to come to us. And I will say in the background of this, there's only one thing that everyone involved with the board system agreed on and how to proceed, and it was that everybody was frustrated. They all agreed it was broken. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll fix democracy. Just give me a minute. I will think of a way. So what we're going to look into a little bit more detail tonight is part of what we established to start. So there's been this, I had high hopes that we'd be well past where we are right now, but as we talked about, government moves at a glacial pace and things happen. Priorities come in front of this. So what we're starting to implement now this year is a new operational model to get recommendations to the commission. And really what it does is it puts the boards and committees at the proper appropriate level so that policy recommendations can get to them, and then operations, strategic implementation can happen at the appropriate level through the city manager and staff. So just to go through these really briefly, I won't spend a ton of time. We developed these templated agendas and minutes. And Alex is going to go into these, so I don't spend a ton of time, but the goal was to try and brand these to look very much like the commission's products. So they understand, anybody that comes along understands that you are part of the city organization. We're all one part of a whole. So templated governing docs includes the resolutions creation. Some of you in the boards that you serve on have already gone through this process, and you'll see the highlights that we went through. A couple of things I want to point out, term limits and term periods were important to the commission, and that was partly because they were hoping to get new ideas, fresh folks on these boards. We had some boards where no judgment, it's not my role to decide if this was right or wrong. We had folks that were on some of the boards for 40 years. 40 years, that's a ton of institutional knowledge, but it also prevented other folks from being on those boards. That was a seat that they might have had some fresh ideas, but it wasn't available to them. So what the commission wanted to see is turnover at an appropriate level to get some institutional knowledge, but then give another person an opportunity to participate. Staff liaison role and responsibility was established because, as we keep talking about, we have to define those roles and responsibilities so that staff understand they report to their supervisor, who then probably reports to the city manager. They do not report to you as a board member. You will always remember that you're part of the legislative branch and a very important part. So you stay on that policy level. Sure, go, Bob. Sure. 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 Yeah, oh, of course. Most of your staff liaisons, they get it. They actually, what we've talked a lot about internally, and there's a couple of staff liaisons, I think, at least one, that are here tonight. Leah is awesome. They understand that your role is super important as boards, but it's difficult to serve two sides, right? So it's a really fine line between someone asking a question and then saying, you should do this. And it's easy to fall into that trap, especially because you're working with the same person over and over again. What we've told staff is if they are unsure or uncomfortable, they have the right and authority to say, I'm gonna put a pause on that and I'm gonna go check with my supervisor. If they feel uncomfortable and are not prepared to answer that question because either they didn't have the information, which very often could be the case, right? They may not have an answer right then. Or perhaps that might not be something that they're sure that they should be diving into because maybe it's not a fully vetted idea. And I'm sure some of you have experienced this. Something gets said at a public meeting, it's a half-baked idea. It's not a for sure, it's not a decision at that point. And someone takes it and says, well, I heard that the City of Helena is getting chickens and they're putting them in everybody's backyard, mandated. Yep. So they may feel uncomfortable about answering some of those questions in real time. So they may just say, I'm going to put a pause there and I'm going to go check with my supervisor. But by all means, ask the question. You just may not get an answer. Not right then anyway, okay? Annual report. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but the annual report, I will say, is probably one of the most hopeful pieces of all of this, and it is to help the boards and committees understand nothing gets done at a government, in a government entity, without a line item. Even if you're trying to advocate for a policy change that's nebulous, it may require a master plan. Does anyone know how much money goes into master plans? Or even knows what they are? They are super expensive. I need to get in the master plan game. And so you may make a decision as a board to ask the commission to consider things that, as a board member, you're sort of by design in a tunnel vision. You have a myopic view of your topic because you're there to talk about this one thing. What we want you to do is take those great ideas and bring them forward in an annual report to the commission that we've asked staff, the staff you work with in your specialty, your area you work in, to identify the best part of their timeline for their budget. And then we say, when should the Golf Advisory Board bring the fee structure and their recommendation on that to you so you can start incorporating those changes and think them through as a director in your budget? Because there's two parts here that need to be considered. And when Commissioner Logan's sitting on the dais, he wants to have the most information possible to determine whether or not that recommendation from the board is going to fit into the big picture, because that's his role. His role is to make that decision at this big level, considering everything. And that includes the constituency, what the public wants. So that the annual report to the commission, we'll talk a little bit more detail in as quickly as possible, unfortunately, but that's something we're starting to roll out this year. And those timelines are established in the resolutions, those boards that have gone through that resolution process. The 5-year review of a board and committee. I will say this feels scary at the outset, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Boards and committees that have these clauses established in the resolutions, they essentially say that the commission every 5 years is going to review that resolution. Because what happens every 4 years? An election. So maybe the commission, I don't see this happening, but it certainly could. The commission completely turns over. We have an entirely new commission. This board that was created 5 years ago may not align, that purpose, scope and purpose may not align with the current commission's priorities. You serve at the pleasure of the commission. They want to look at this resolution and determine whether or not the current scope fits with their priorities as the legislative body. And so we give them that opportunity. They may think you're doing an amazing job and probably will and say status quo. Or maybe it needs some tweaks. And that's also acceptable. You, as a member of the public and as a board member, should relish the opportunity to have a discussion about why your board is important and how you might even improve it in these 5-year reviews. I've had some people get like, ooh, that means we're going to go away. No, not at all. It's an opportunity to have that discussion and on a regular timeline, so things don't get stagnant, because that's one thing that I've heard over and over again from the public. Things just stay stagnant, stale. You guys aren't innovative. Here's an opportunity to be innovative. Yeah.
Well-intentioned committees have been created. Then people who are interested in serving their community via board service get on that board and find that all of their efforts are not. Now you have this rush of amazing volunteers who never get called back. So it says you understand Oh, sorry. Yes.
So do you want to summarize real quick?
The review is good for both sides because if you're a new volunteer and you're serving your community and you get on a board that unbeknownst to you has been dead in the water for 15 years because the purpose was served, now you're frustrated because you spent a bunch of time going to these meetings, nothing happened, commission doesn't care, and now you're exiting stage left because it's not worth your time to be involved. So that review protects both the city, but really also you as the individual volunteer.
Okay, so I know we're getting over time already and I'm really sorry. So I'm gonna fly through a few things. The bylaws, some of you have also had to adopt these bylaws. Some of the QJ boards and administrative boards have adopted a version of these bylaws. These were established by the commission and it covers a lot of key points that we've already talked about this evening. These are all available through your staff liaison if you want to read them and talk through them with us. We're always open to talking about why these bylaws were established the way they were. Decorum for our members, the expectation, corrective action by the commission, should they have a board member. Now, I won't speak for the commission member that remains here this evening, but this has come up amongst them as well. The one thing that I've said over and over again over the past 6 years while I've been working on this project is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So the commission understands they too need to take a good hard look at how they operate. And that's why we're doing these resolutions coming up. So going back to this idea, solving democracy, how do we get recommendations to the commission? What I went back and looked through is that Fortune 500 companies, the military and government entities all use a few models, but this is the one that seemed to fit with the mold of the City of Helena, the structures we already had in place. And really what it is it's a military model that helps define the various levels of operations and policy, as you can see, and it's part of the doctrine of the armed forces and the joint armed forces doctrine. And this is what we used to help define some of the documents that we are going to talk about tonight, okay? So when we talk about how a recommendation might go through a process, what I did was try and apply that last slide, which is from the joint publication and a little dry, to what we'd be talking about if a board member or a board came forward with a recommendation. They'd come to a commission through a formal recommendation at a public meeting to discuss and have consensus direction to proceed with the commission. Commission would direct the city manager, who then would direct his staff, usually starting at a director level at a department. That administrative review and analysis is an opportunity for staff to respond, and that's perfectly good and okay and should be encouraged. You as a board and your myopic view, which is why you're there to focus on this topic, you may not have all the pieces in front of you. The staff too needs to be included because maybe they've already started working on this, but they have a CIP plan that's established 5 years down the road. Resources are limited in local governments and shrinking every year. So department heads and the staff had to take into consideration, what can we get done with this much? Now, I can tell you that in this model that we've sort of started to institute with some of the boards, even if the director couldn't say, we can't fully support this, every one of those directors comes and they say, I actually want to try and find a way to take parts of this recommendation, implement them. They're always thinking about the recommendations you guys make and take them seriously. They just may not be able to say, we can't fully support to the commission at a public meeting that we do all of this. And they have their reasons. No one's doing it just to be punitive. Director's going to direct his staff, which is the operational level, and they're going to do an implementation analysis because even the staff at the lower end of the department level, they may have thoughts about how this might roll out. And then it may have to work its way back through the meeting chain again and go back to the commission because the staff may have concerns or questions that they need to clarify, and they're going to ask the commission to give them further direction through the city manager. If this model is done right, it will take multiple meetings. That's why government moves slow, is so that it can be slowly winnowed down and refined through everyone that's involved, and you get the best end product and the most participation. So simply put, At a commission level and the board level, that legislative level, you're asking for the what. That's what the policy is. The city manager, the administrator for the city, he's going to determine who and what, or who and how, sorry, who and how that policy is going to get implemented. And then the directors and his staff are going to take action. So because I know it's late and you're all sick of being here, I called board management is a balancing act. You have all of these different components trying to work together to come up with a good end product. And everybody's vying for space on that teeter-totter. And sometimes as a board, you feel like you're not being heard, or because you made a recommendation and the commission didn't implement it, at least not then, you were told no. That is frustrating. I will tell you that there are always considerations at a staff level that have to factor in. There's resources, and maybe the commission has heard from other members of the public that this isn't the right time and it's not what this constituency wants. So this workflow, I think we'll probably put in front of you guys, maybe through your staff liaisons and in their staff liaison folder, so we're not spending a ton of time on it. But this seems like a lot of gobbledygook. It really is describing what we just talked about. And it's an opportunity for you as a board to create a written recommendation that goes through a process that ends up at a public meeting, just as you discuss it at your public meeting. Your chair people, your secretary, you will devise a written recommendation that will go through the city manager to make sure he has time on his agenda, because that's part of his role. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. The commission doesn't make the agenda, the city manager does. So you may call a commissioner and say, why isn't our item on the agenda yet? The city manager is trying to balance all of those things, take everything into consideration. And anyone that was at the meeting last night till 9 o'clock with me understands how quickly those agendas can get out of control if we have to do too much business in one meeting. What did somebody say recently? No good decisions are made at 2 a.m., Missoula. So 4 a.m., thank you. So what I would say is that we'll revisit this at some point, but it's really an opportunity for the staff to work with you, or have an opportunity to push back if necessary on the recommendations you make, because they may have a good reason for it. Or they may want to have the commission also consider, say, we like this recommendation, but here's this other thing we want you to think about too, in conjunction with. Okay? So at the bottom, you'll see that the commission can then consider your recommendation, and there are 3 options. There is approve fully, and then request action through the city manager. We'll request further discussion, and that's when it comes back. It comes back to the meeting. Or they can say, no, thank you. Not right now. So going back to this, I won't go back through this, but really what we're talking about is this legislative function. And so we keep defining that role of where the boards would step in and advise the commission. You don't advise staff unless that is your board. I guess I should put that caveat. If that is your role as a board, is to advise staff, and there are a few, you know who you are, we'll hold you aside. Okay, so a practical example of this. Bear with me, we're almost done. So I don't know why it became a thing for this particular training, but we are stuck on livestock. So what I said was that in my example of this, that the board, we'll call it the Parks Board because it seems like the only one that makes sense, is going to make a recommendation, bear with me, here it is, to consider a policy to use agricultural animals or livestock to assist in maintaining city park properties and or open spaces. The board would take formal action at a public meeting. They write a formal recommendation through their chair and secretary. And then they're going to go ahead and request time through their staff liaison, say, here, we've written this recommendation. This recommendation. There's no S at the end of that. One at a time. And that's to ask people to be thoughtful about how it proceeds. I can't police that and say that you shouldn't make 10, but I would ask you to thoughtfully consider, if you give one recommendation and you spend the amount of time that you should on these recommendations, they come to the commission fully vetted and thought through and researched, the likelihood of them passing is going to be far greater. So the board is going to ask for this to be considered at a commission meeting. So at this conceptual level, they say, yeah, we want you to consider using baby goats, mini cows, and chickens. And the commission's like, this isn't a bad idea. They're going to have staff there to ask questions of. They're going to have public there because it's going to be a publicly noticed meeting. So the public can sit and go, what are you talking about? We don't want goats on our open spaces. By the way, that happened here in Helena. I don't know how many of you know that. I won't tell stories, but apparently didn't go that great. So yeah, so that discussion happens in a public forum, so everybody gets a chance to weigh in. So during that commission meeting, they talk about, well, what are our other alternatives? And the staff is going to step in and they're going to say, okay, well, we have some thoughts about this too. The board would have made a written recommendation that said to the clerk's office, in this case, or their staff liaison to be put on that agenda. So the commission considers it, they talk it through, they have questions for the staff, they take public comment. And then ultimately they look at the city manager and are like, well, we like this, we want to save money. Sounds like livestock would be cheaper and we're concerned about the cost and danger of our children playing in parks and school and playing next door to parks that are being sprayed with dangerous chemicals. So we want to look into livestock. So at that meeting, the mayor or the manager says, well, okay, 15 years ago, we tried goats. It didn't work. They ate everything and there was no control. Miniature cows, they're too cute. We'll definitely get them stolen. Plus, what did livestock animals do? Yeah, the DEQ has told us that can't happen. They're going to leave poo everywhere. What happens when animals poo? Smells. There's a public safety, public health concern here. Who's going to pick it up? So the manager and the staff are going to have thoughts about this, right? That's part of the process. And so he says, well, here's our concerns. How about I vet this with staff a little bit more? We haven't tried chickens before. Let me talk to them and see what I can bring back. So next meeting comes in. He says, all right, we've got this concept. Turns out that chickens wouldn't be a bad idea. And it turns out, I talked to the public works director, there's a USDA grant available. And chickens can be provided through this grant. And they're really good at eating insects and boll weevils, which are attacking our parks and open space. I made that up. I don't know anything about insects, so don't hold me to that. And then they're going to go ahead and say, well, we like the idea of the chickens. How about we take this out for a pilot project? The board knew that that was going to be on the agenda so they could come back and participate and give their thoughts and say, we still think goats are better, but sure, it's better than nothing. Public comment would have happened once again, so the public could come and say, we hate chickens or we love them, whatever. Yeah, they eat open spaces, boll weevils, whatever. We don't like chicken poo either. The staff can answer questions from the commission, the decision makers. It was all properly noticed. So the concept through this whole process has been vetted, planned, tested, and then ultimately implemented. And the staff has the best direction possible at the end. They know what is expected of them. And it's come from this chain of command through the commission. And they've gotten an opportunity to weigh in on it too. So they take some ownership. You feel like you as a board have gotten to say how that policy is formulated through this public meeting process. So what happens? Instead of everybody feeling like they're enemy combatants, you're now partners. You're partners in a process that took a while, but it got you a good product at the end. And the public was informed. So now that I'm through all that, there's supposed to be a goat noise here. The sound isn't working. I'm very disappointed. I want to say this. No is an acceptable answer. And more often than not, it may be the answer. Your job as a board is to bring great ideas, visionary ideas. Greg Worth used that word with me once when he was telling me, not sure that we're going in the right direction with this, but I love that word, visionary. these ideas that you guys are going to bring forward for policy recommendations, that's what the commission wants to hear. But there may be other things that they have to take into account in their role as elected officials. And so they're going to maybe say, no, not at this time. But this has gone through a public process. It's been vetted through staff. It's been vetted through the public. It's been recorded. There's a record of this process, and we can set it aside. My office will, I can assure you. And maybe the next commission, or maybe next year, we pull that out and it's looked at again. And that's all because of you and the work you did. So these records are important. I'm talking about that a little bit more in the next section with Alex's demo, so I won't spend a ton of time. Alex threw these together just to give you a basic idea. I will tell you that we're going to give you guys some spreadsheets, or not spreadsheets, I'm sorry, FAQ sheets to help answer some of these questions since we're so short on time this evening. Thank you for hanging in there. But you'll notice that part of the bylaws are that you guys as officers are expected to take the parliamentary training through the local government center. It's to make you better at chairing these meetings for all the reasons Becky talked about. If you didn't get the parliamentary cheat sheet in your packet tonight, I put extra ones here. We run meetings at a board level, even with these parliamentary procedures, because it makes it easier for you to control meetings when they get out of hand. I will tell you, I'm seeing that more and more in my office at a commission level and at a board level. I have people call me almost every week and they say, I have a problem. The more professional and orderly you are as a chair and in your board meetings, the more orderly the public are going to be too. Compliance with open meeting laws. You're going to ensure that as the chairperson, you're also going to work with your staff liaison and your secretary to help develop the agendas. That is an art, by the way. And make sure that you're following those points of order, like I said earlier. Vice chair, you'll step in that role should the chair be unable to. And you too will need to do the training for parliamentary procedure. And then the secretary, as I said, in my opinion, probably the most important person in the officers club. And that's because you're the record keeper. You're going to keep track of everything your board is doing. So we want to thank you for the time and effort you put into this. Before I let you go, I'm going to have Alex take 5 minutes to run very quickly through, right? Alex, you promised 5 minutes? Okay, everybody looks glazed over and Alex said she can send it as a YouTube link. I got a thumbs up. Oh, thank God. So Alex will put that together on a YouTube link. Once again, I can't thank you guys enough for your service, despite sometimes feeling like this is pulling nails, pulling teeth, whatever. Feels like torture sometimes. I genuinely am the biggest advocate for the boards in this organizational structure. You guys are super valuable. I want you to feel like that we're making progress, even if it is slow. And this time next year, when we do this all over again, because I know you'll be here, we'll hopefully start to establish some of these, this procedure that we've been talking about, and you'll start to see the fruits of your labor more clearly defined. With that, I want to make sure we cover any questions, or we can just race out the door at warp speed in an orderly fashion. Kathy. Sure. With which notes, Kathy, can you tell me? Like the PowerPoint? Sure, sure. Yeah, we can make that available. Also, for those of you that didn't know this, you aren't YouTube stars, but this is on YouTube. We record all of these, and they go on YouTube. So somewhere I am looking 10 pounds heavier on YouTube right now. Very happy about that. So yeah, you can always rewatch this, and for sure, we can provide the presentations to you all tonight because I know it's a lot of information in one sitting. Anybody else? Oh, one more. Yeah. So that's a great question. Joint boards are different. So those of you that sit on joint boards, you might be a city resident serving on those joint boards. we would need to go through a joint process, public process, and engage our county commissioners. At this time, the county's like, we like how ours operate. We don't have any major issues. It's not for me to say. I follow the direction of the city commission. So this is what we're doing. So that's a good question. If you serve on a joint board, then I don't predict that it will happen anytime soon, but who knows? I saw another hand come. No? Just leave them on your table and we'll grab them. Okay. Okay. All right. Once again, thank you guys. Thank you for hanging in there for an extra 20 minutes. We really appreciate it. Have a great evening.